Chapter 655. Do you have any favorite wine? Behind the workbench, Eliza asked warmly. If it's from Ingjo, it should be sake or whiskey, right? Or tequila. Dongsha's white wine is also fine. Please feel free to order. It's my treat today. Giving out free questions at this time, isn't it obvious that you have bad intentions? Huaisher knocked on the bar in front of him. I don't drink much when I mix, so you can make yourself at home. If you want, give me some wine with loneliness and heartache. Please don't take out this messy way of ordering wine again, okay? We don't have that kind of thing here. Eliza took out a bottle, pulled out the cork and smelled it. She happily enjoyed the sweet taste. How about some rum? It can be mixed with happy water. After putting 2 slices of lemon, you will feel free. Although the place that originally felt very free will be miserable in the end, it's always right to enjoy the present. So casual? Huaisher was dumbfounded. It's just a joke. The one who enjoys the present is me. She directly picked up the bottle of rum, drank a part of it, and then threw it aside. This was her freedom, and it had nothing to do with others. Enter the state. In this way, Eliza exhaled happily. She reached out and took out the base wine prepared for this competition from the deepest part of the cabinet. Her movements were swift. The bottles were piled up like a small mountain. Huaisher's eyes widened. So exaggerated? It looks like a lot, but it's actually just seasoning. Just between her 5 fingers, strands of dark precipitation slowly emerged. Gray lines lit up from under her fingernails, and countless ferocious and malicious eyes intertwined in the darkness between her 5 fingers. That was the breath left by the existence above the abyss, the curse left by the king who ruled hell. The curse of the ruler? Huaisher frowned. No wonder you were forced to take a vacation. What did you do to provoke a great god? It's just a little contribution, don't worry about it. But this curse is very interesting, so I kept it. Later, I found a corpse workshop to modify it, and it turned into a pretty good work. Eliza's fingertips rotated the ounce glass and smoothly received the clear wine. The clear and transparent aroma of the wine reverberated in the air, causing Vladimir to excitedly take off his sunglasses and sniff the fragrance. Vodka? Huaisher asked as he identified the mellowness that was so pure that it did not contain any fragrance. Then, she saw the tomatoes and celery coming out of the crisper box. The blood-like tomato juice was squeezed into the shaker pot and mixed with the vodka, faintly mixing with the pungent smell of chili. Then, lemon juice was squeezed in. Pepper powder, chili powder, all kinds of spices were used generously. In the end, a stalk of celery was mixed evenly, perfectly fusing the ruler's curse in the hand. In less than a minute, a glass of scarlet wine was delivered to Huaisher. The most suitable aperitif for you, Bloody Mary. Please, Miss Paper. Eliza smiled and studied his expression. In the blood-colored wine, there seemed to be endless darkness rippling. In a trance, the wonders and malice of the abyss emerged, making people shudder. When Huaisher picked up the wine glass, he could perceive what kind of balm and malice was contained in the glass. Once swallowed, the consequences would not be much different from swallowing lava, right? In the silence, Huaisher thought, and he felt that something was not quite right. Time passed by bit. Eliza was not in a hurry. She just looked at Miss Paper's contemplative look. After a long time, she reminded softly, the best tasting time is almost over. Even if you are a novice, you should be mentally prepared, right? Huaisher sighed, picked up the wineglass, and took a sip. In an instant, he felt the unique sour and sweet taste of fresh tomatoes erupt in his mouth, with the fragrance of spices, and it fell into his stomach like hot magma. Immediately afterward, Huaisher felt that his vision turned black, and he suddenly couldn't breathe. He subconsciously held the table for support. He fell into a daze. What kind of curse is this? Even the decaying dream origin substance could not affect him. His strength, agility, and even endurance were shaved off by a large portion the moment he swallowed it. Almost 1/5? He didn't even know what happened. The weakness came so suddenly that he didn't even have time to resist. If this was a game, he even suspected that there was a game designer behind the scenes who suddenly adjusted his character's game values. He couldn't even feel the curse state. It was so sudden that the situation had reversed. Grief, I call it that. Eliza leaned on the bar, looked at Miss Paper's pale face, and explained considerately, "You have to be careful. The curse left by the dead ruler is to make all things wither with him, and it is inevitable to pass away. Once touched, life, stamina, and origin substance will quickly disappear. The Continuation Academy couldn't deal with it, so they could only seal it in my body. Don't worry, what you experience is just the product of the blending. It can't even be considered an aftershock. It is reflected in your body. Every time you touch it, it will probably deduct 1/5 of your existing life. This is just an illusion formed by the erosion of reality. After an hour, it will collapse." She paused for a moment, revealing a dangerous smile. "If you can persist in front of the table for an hour, victory will be yours." How much wine could a skilled bartender make in an hour? If it was Eliza, at full power, she could make at least 60 cups. Every time his body touched it, 1/5 of his life was deducted. After an hour, Huaisher's life would become the same as a paramecium. Not to mention continuing to drink, he probably wouldn't even have the strength to breathe. Not to mention the other disasters fused in the wine, therefore, the number of contact must be reduced. In other words, Huaisher lowered his head to look at the remaining half of the cup of wine. He instantly raised his head and drank it all. In one gulp, he drank it all. Immediately, the inexplicable weakness came again, and Huaisher's stamina was drained again. Then, he felt as if his stomach had been punched by someone. Everything in front of him turned dark, and his eyes were burned red by the explosion of alcohol. He felt that he had swallowed a cup of hot lava. Right now, that ball of viscous fire was burning in his stomach, constantly ravaging his lungs. Don't underestimate vodka. This pure alcohol mixture is flammable. Today, I have prepared the water of life, which is comparable to nitroglycerin, for you. Eliza looked at Huaisher's red cheeks, couldn't help but reach out and pinch it. She sighed considerately. If you can't drink it, you can admit defeat at any time. He had already shown mercy to his opponent, Huaisher. Otherwise, she didn't need to explain the principle of the curse. Of course, maybe this was also to bluff him, but Huaisher couldn't find any way to break it for the time being. This was the most unsolvable and straightforward way of fighting. The weakening of his life force brought about a rapid decline in his resistance to alcohol. Eliza didn't even need to poison him. When Huaisher's life force fell to 1/20th of the current level, he would be drunk to death in an instant, ushering in failure. In other words, he had to make her admit defeat before he fell. In the silence, Huaisher slowly raised his head and took a deep breath. He looked up. "Next, it's my turn, right?" Miss Huaiji grinned and asked softly like a beast looking at an enemy. Being looked at like that, Eliza's breathing paused for a moment. Then, Miss Huaiji picked up the sake in the box beside her and placed it on the bar counter. The glass and the solid wood rubbed against each other, making a low and crisp sound. "Sake, I haven't tasted it for a long time." Eliza sighed. "But the sake itself, other than being cut, doesn't have any room to be processed, right? Moreover, if you just bought someone else's wine for me to drink, it can't be considered as a wine master's ability. Don't worry, this bottle of wine can be considered as one that I participated in brewing. And it's a work of painstaking effort." Huaisher's thumb stroked the cork of the wine bottle, and his expression became nostalgic. The moment his thumb lifted the cork, a clear and mellow wine aroma gushed out from it like a waterfall, turning into an omnipresent tide that spread in all directions. Just like a light rain in early spring, it silently moistened every part of his surroundings. He could feel the joyous vitality in the air. Right now, that vitality was resonating with the paper in front of Orisa, as if it came from the same source. Without a doubt, this was her masterpiece. Tengo Mountain's technique? That's amazing, Miss Huaiji. My impression of you has changed. Eliza was intoxicated by the fragrance of the wine. She opened her eyes and sighed solemnly. To be able to brew such an excellent wine, perhaps you are really an enemy that can defeat me. You flatter me, it's just a little work. Huai Shi smiled and took out the porcelain bottle of sake from the box beside him. He tilted the bottle and poured the wine into it. About 200 milliliters. When his palm swept across the clay stove, a flame had already risen vigorously from it. Is this for warm-up? Eliza nodded in understanding. I usually like to drink cold, and it's not bad to drink warm sake once in a while. It's not sake, it's a cocktail. Huai Shi corrected her. He raised his hand and pressed it on the porcelain bottle. Under the long glove, the steel arm cracked, and a faint flame appeared. Casting begin. The flame on the clay stove suddenly rose violently, almost engulfing the container and the porcelain bottle in it. The so-called warm-up was originally a way to drink sake after it was warmed up. But now, this sudden burst of terrifying firepower was as if it was going to boil the entire Qingjiu. After it's completely boiled, the alcohol will be lost and it won't taste good anymore. Stop it. As a person who loved wine, Eliza widened her eyes and reached out to stop, but she was stopped by Huai Shi's other hand. Miss Huaiji was smiling. Don't worry, Mississippi, the woman said. The modulation has just begun. Under her palm, in the dancing flame, the clear sake was quickly dyed scarlet. Like a burning flame, it was surging and fluctuating. Under the precise control of the alchemy fire, there was no loss of the alcohol composition, and the entire porcelain bottle had already ushered in a qualitative change under this water-refining alchemy. Time passed in a flash. When the expanding flame dissipated, Huai Shi raised 2 fingers and pulled the porcelain bottle out of the water. The water in the container didn't even have any heat rising. All the heat was concentrated in the liquor. When Huai Shi's fingers tilted, the blood-red liquor quietly flowed into the thumb-sized porcelain cup, rippling with light. It was like a melted gem. Please use it, Miss Eliza. The exquisite porcelain cup was placed in front of her, and Motoko Huaiji said softly, Special sake volcano. Chapter 656. A delicate porcelain cup was placed in front of Eliza. She reached out and picked it up. The wall of the cup was cold, and she couldn't feel any heat. But the dark red wine in the cup seemed to contain a terrifying heat, which made her scalp tingle. In silence, she sighed softly. To be honest, I thought you would delay the time. This was what Eliza didn't want to see the most. According to the rules, if both sides poured wine for each other in each round, Huai Shi could slack off in his own segment. What's wrong with mixing a cup of wine for half an hour? Can't he strive for perfection? As long as he delayed a little longer, the effect of death of wounds would be broken. However, Huai Shi's speed was faster than she had expected. Even in less than 2 minutes, the wine was poured, heated, and mixed in one go and came to her hand. It was like she couldn't wait to welcome the second round. Huai Shi shrugged and looked at her expression. If I can't make you admit defeat in a fair and square way, you must have other means, right? You're so annoying, Miss Huai Shi. You make it sound like I'm cheating. Eliza smiled mysteriously, lowered her head, looked at the porcelain bottle in front of her, and the wine cup beside Huai Shi, and asked curiously, Why are there 2 cups? It's too boring to drink alone, isn't it? Drinking with guests is a unique expression of intimacy in Yingzhou. Miss Huai Shi held her cup in her hand and asked slyly, Although it doesn't make sense, Ms. Eliza, will you refuse? Of course not. Eliza replied calmly, With such a beauty drinking with me, who will choose to refuse? No more nonsense. She picked up the wine cup in her hand and drank it. Then, she felt the sharp pain of her skull cracking. Her body twitched involuntarily, her legs went soft, and she almost couldn't stand still. The palm holding the bar left a deep imprint in the solid wood. Pain. Intense pain burst forth from his skull, bringing with it an illusory force that seemed to have materialized. It was as if someone had placed an axe on his head. Immediately after, a terrifying pain spread through his body along with the wine that was just right warm. Everywhere it passed, all the coldness was dispelled, causing his entire body to become comfortably warm. What he swallowed was not a liquid, but a warm and fragrant mist. It was intoxicating, but at the same time, it was unbearable to endure the terrible pain of being chopped by the axe. Following the spread of the pain, an uncontrollable wave spread from the bottom of his heart. Eliza panted violently and supported herself on the bar counter. Her chest under the black vest rose and fell violently, and her expression gradually became distorted. His expression became ferocious. Because of anger. The anger that seemed to have materialized quickly spread throughout her body, filling up her entire body. Along with the pain and tipsiness, it rapidly expanded and gradually eroded her soul. It caused the rage that had condensed into a substance to break out of his body. Amidst the dead silence, faint exclamations could be heard from the audience. All the cooking demons raised their eyes in astonishment and stared at Eliza behind the counter. "So beautiful, you're burning up." Huaisher picked up his wine glass, took a sip casually, and praised indifferently, "Being yourself in the fire, Miss Eliza's burning appearance is really moving." That's right, Eliza was burning up. The rampaging origin substance was infected by her anger, and wisps of it seeped out of her pores and skin, turning into a scarlet glow that enveloped her. Across the bar counter, he could still feel the blazing heat. It was as if the lid of a furnace was opened. That was not Huaisher's anger, but the anger that was originally hidden in Eliza's body. What Huaisher did was at most sprinkle a spark of fire. Caught off guard, Eliza's anger was ignited from the inside out, causing her consciousness to shake instantly. She almost couldn't hold back and attacked the enemy in front of her. The sharp hand knife stopped abruptly at the last moment. The 5 fingers that were entangled with the dark curse had a faint malevolence and curse. It was only a line away from Miss Huaisher's pupils. At the last moment, she managed to control herself. She didn't break the rules of the culinary demon duel, otherwise, Eliza would have instantly been sent out. "You really have a lot of firepower. There must be someone who made you so angry." Huaisher sipped his wine nonchalantly and raised his finger. A wisp of condensed flame slowly rose from the tip of his finger. That was alcohol. The alcohol in Huaisher's body was being ignited by his anger, quickly being metabolized. Thanks to Daitengu's miraculous hands, this brand new bottle of sake perfectly merged with Huaisher's blood. The vitality that belonged to a mountain ghost flowed within. If one were to simply use it, it was indeed an incomparably precious high-quality wine. Not only could it heal hidden injuries and increase vitality, but it also tasted wonderful and intoxicating. To Huaisher, this was also a material that was hard to come by. Apart from this, there weren't many things that could contain his origin substance so perfectly. The anger in his origin substance equipment was merged into it, forming a specially tuned volcano. If it was a normal person, wouldn't they have been burned to ashes by this kind of anger and heat long ago? Eliza actually only lost control for a moment and almost punched herself. Her eyes were scarlet red. In the silence, Huaisher picked up the porcelain bottle and poured wine for her again. She hadn't even finished drinking. "Do you want to continue?" Huaisher asked. Eliza didn't reply. She silently picked up the wine cup and once again drank it in one gulp. Once again, the blazing flames appeared. Every time she drank, she would experience the pain of her skull being shattered. That pain was simply too real, as if someone had really taken an axe and chopped off her neck, taking away her head. Under the sweet fragrance of the alcohol, her body burned with anger and she slowly walked towards death. On the other hand, this didn't affect Huaisher at all. His own blood, his own origin substance, and his own wine. There was no reason that he would be poisoned to death after going out for a while. Instead, he used this opportunity to expel the alcohol that had accumulated in his body. He relied on the vitality of the plants in the wine to replenish his weak vitality. Even if it was only a temporary illusory state, he still relied on drinking to recover close to his original range. As the saying went, the other went away. Huaishe had turned the tables. When Eliza put down the porcelain cup in her hand for the last time, she couldn't help but let out a long breath. After the blazing flames were extinguished, she slowly regained consciousness. The pain quickly left like an illusion. "I actually got drunk?" she sighed softly. "More or less. Don't alcohol and anger make people lose control?" Huaishe asked. "Can you continue?" "Of course." Eliza took out a handkerchief from the pocket of her vest and wiped the sweat from her face, fingers, and neck. After changing the burnt hairband, she regained her capable and experienced posture. She casually grabbed a handful of ice cubes from the freezer beside her and threw them into her mouth, chewing with crunching sounds. Finally, she regained her tranquility under the stimulation of the cold. The remaining ice cubes were thrown into the mixing pot, and then the ounce cup was flipped over with her fingertip. Rum, vodka, bourbon, gin, brandy were thrown in like flowing water. Just like at the World Wine Exhibition, dozens of different liquors were mixed together in the snow flask. Then, the ruler's curse turned into a whirlpool, mixing all the chaotic materials. When they fell into the wine cup with ice cubes, they turned into a clear and fragrant liquid, and no bomb-like lethality could be seen. A can of happy water was pulled off, and as Eliza's palm tilted, it was mixed evenly in the wine cup. She simply drank the remaining half herself. The empty can was thrown into the trash can next to her, and a slice of cut lemon was thrown into the cup, adding a seductive sour taste to the bitterness of the alcohol and the sweetness of the drink. In the end, the wine with ice mist was placed in front of Huaishe. The sweet smell lingered at the tip of his nose. "This is the wine that loses my virginity." Huaishe looked up with a half-smile and asked his opponent curiously, "Does Ms. Eliza have evil thoughts about me? Although you are my type, my principle is to never make a move on the guests, so unfortunately, we don't have the fate that the people of Ingzhou say." Eliza shrugged and approached with a smile. "The second cup, Long Island iced tea, please, Ms. Huaizhi." This was an extra-large cocktail that was directly placed in a beer glass. It was more than 3 times the weight of the Bloody Mary just now. Not to mention the terrifying lethality contained in it, obviously, she didn't give Huaishe a chance to finish it in one gulp. "Cocktails are something to be savored slowly," Eliza said happily. "Drinking in one gulp is too boring. You have to repeatedly taste the bartender's painstaking efforts and design. Unfortunately, I'm probably the kind of unwelcome guest." Ms. Huaizhi shrugged, picked up the beer cup, raised her head, and opened her mouth. The muffled sound of water burst out from her throat. The beer cup was quickly tilted toward her open mouth. The oversized Long Island iced tea was poured directly into her stomach without swallowing. It was like filling a thermos. After she finished pouring the wine, Huaishe put down the wine cup and burped right in front of her with a happy smile on her face. Eliza was also looking at him, smiling even more happily than Huaishe. "I was fooled." At that moment, a crimson color emerged from Huaizhi's body and spread quickly. Then, faint water vapor rose from her body. It was as if her whole body was shrouded in mist. Huaishe widened his eyes in shock. His breathing was rapid. At this moment, he was sweating profusely. As the famous scumbag's happy wine, even if Long Island iced tea tasted sweet and sour, it was essentially using the taste of happy water and lemon to cover up the internal alcohol content that was completely excessive. Not to mention the terrible lethality of the human digestive system that was several times greater when different wines were mixed together. Drinking it in one gulp seemed to avoid the weakening of the curse of death, but it made Eliza's alcohol bomb completely explode from the inside of her body. Huaishe froze in place, only feeling that his vision was quickly turning dark. Chapter 657. He opened his mouth subconsciously and wanted to spit it out. But he raised his hand to cover his mouth, clenched his teeth, and restrained the nausea surging in his chest. That was the body's instinctive rejection. But rejection wouldn't work. Sweat continued to flow, making Miss Huaiji's face gradually become wet. As his vitality plummeted again, Huai Shi felt that the alcohol content in his blood vessels began to soar, incomprehensible and unbelievable. Even this time, there wasn't even a transition phase at the beginning. Without warning, he directly entered a state of deep drunkenness. Until this time, Huai Shi discovered that the alcohol brought by Bloody Mary was not metabolized as he thought. Even after the alcohol of Long Island iced tea was injected, it reappeared. It directly skipped the initial tipsy stage, and he fell into an uncontrollable drunkenness. I still underestimated the bartender's skills. Eliza's alcohol couldn't be metabolized. Instead, it was like a stack of poison. It would increase with each round of drinking until the upper limit of the rapid decline of the tolerance could no longer resist the erosion of alcohol. Then, everything would be over. I've watched your previous matches. Your resistance is indeed very high, but this isn't something that can be ignored just because you can resist it. Eliza looked down at Huaiji Susie's embarrassed look and raised her eyebrows happily. After all, how to quickly get the guests drunk is the bartender's unique skill. Huai Shi didn't respond. He was trying his best to resist the erosion of alcohol and the urge to fall asleep and faint. He had no time to talk. Eliza shook her head and sighed. She took out the iron box from her pocket. After opening it, she rummaged through the tobacco and cigarette paper. After skillfully rolling one out, she stuck out her tongue, licked the corner of the cigarette paper, and sealed it. "Do you want to smoke?" she asked casually, but Huai Shi didn't respond. She shook her head and sighed. She tilted her head and lit it herself. After taking 2 puffs, she took off the cigarette and stuffed it into the corner of Huaiji Susie's mouth. The strong smell of tobacco mixed with unknown powder made Huai Shi's drowsy consciousness gradually wake up. It was only temporary. "Surrender?" Eliza asked. "With your current state, let alone holding on to the next round, you can't even continue bartending, right?" Huai Shi propped himself up in a short period of sobriety and absent-mindedness, scrutinizing his opponent who was glowing with shadows. He smiled faintly. "It's not time to admit defeat yet. Besides, who says I don't have a solution? I don't hate stubborn girls." Eliza smiled, but before she finished speaking, she saw that in Huai Shi's hand, a short ingzhou knife that was as short as a rib slowly appeared. The overlapping feathers of the blade had a scarlet bloody light. It was so ferocious. In front of everyone, Huai Shi raised his saber, turned the hilt, and pointed it at his neck. The main artery was stabbed. Eliza's expression suddenly changed, and she reached out to stop her. It was too sudden. She didn't understand why her opponent wanted to commit suicide when he couldn't win, but she instinctively didn't want to see blood on her workbench. She also didn't want this opponent who made her so happy to die for such a reason. But it was too late. The blade sank into Huai Shi's neck. It pierced from the left and came out from the right. There was no scene of blood splattering as expected. It was as if it was just a toy to scare people. But now, Huai Shi raised his hand as if nothing had happened. His eyes gradually became clear, and he was recovering his sobriety. Gradually, he returned to normal. Indeed, the alcohol in the blood couldn't be metabolized, so it was better to just let the blood and alcohol go. In this way, countless blood with the sweet fragrance of alcohol flowed along the resentment and flowed into the cage of dreams. Bit by bit, it was devoured by the crows. This excessive amount of alcohol, enough to intoxicate hundreds of people, was quickly drained from Huai Shi's body. Then, it flowed to the innocent crows. Next, young Master Ming's hematopoietic function was activated. The huge vitality from the mountain ghost surged and quickly turned into blood. Huaishur took a deep breath, took off the cigarette from the corner of his mouth, and flicked the ash. "Thank you for the cigarette." Eliza's expression was unreadable, going to the bathroom to vomit after getting drunk in the wine competition. "This is cheating, Miss Huaishur." "No, I'm just preparing the ingredients for today's last cocktail." Huaishur smiled slyly. "Besides, there's no rule that says you can't bleed yourself in the competition, right?" "Yes, these are the ingredients for today's last cocktail." "Anyway, that's what he said. As for the last cocktail, can't I change the recipe at the last minute?" Casually, he pulled out the resentment that had been washed by the good wine and put away the blood. Huaishur's other hand picked up the empty porcelain bottle again. After pouring in the sake again, he directly inserted it into the ice bucket. Then, the forging furnace was restarted. This time, what burst out was no longer high heat. On the contrary, countless chills were rapidly shrinking inward. The ice in the ice bucket melted at a speed visible to the naked eye. This was because the heat was being transferred from the porcelain bottle to the outside. It was still the water refinement in alchemy and the fluid transformation method in the foundry's skill. The essence of disaster from hell was injected into it. Soon, the bone-chilling gray sake was poured into Eliza's wine cup. "Special sake, Sangran." Huaishur smiled. "Let me give you a spoiler. This is a different feeling from anger. Be careful." Sangran. Eliza lowered her head and stared at the gloomy and heavy color in the glass. Her brows slowly raised. It was indeed the color of Sangran. It was just that this color was really sad. In a trance, she suddenly felt sad. No matter how thick her nerves were, Eliza was still a woman. The gentler her nature was, the easier it was to feel hurt. After this involuntary sigh, she finally reacted, but the glass in front of her was already empty. Only a trace of coldness went down her throat the moment she absent-mindedly drank. With the cold wine fragrance, even the flames of the whole world couldn't extinguish the coldness and loneliness. The chill was spreading. Her movements were stiff in place. As if she was frozen, it was difficult for her to breathe. She was so sad that she couldn't control herself. The past that she couldn't forget once again floated to her heart with this coldness, bringing heart-wrenching sadness and loneliness. She tried to raise her wrist with difficulty, but when her knuckles rubbed against each other, it made a sharp sound. It was difficult to move. It was even difficult to breathe. Because she was bound, from the inside out in the broken mournful sound, the projection in her soul emerged. A dark and illusory chain broke through her lungs and extended from her body. It penetrated the joints, bound the muscles, surrounded the lungs and internal organs, and finally converged on the heart that was beating hard. It gradually shrank inward. Sorrowful Locke. Not caring that Eliza couldn't continue drinking, Huaishur drank one glass after another, tasting the sadness and loneliness that once belonged to him. For this kind of thing, just one glass was enough. Any more wouldn't have any effect. But loneliness and sadness to this extent. It was really unexpected. Huaishur lowered his eyes. Behind the bar counter in front of him, countless chains had pierced out of Eliza's body, binding her layer by layer. They multiplied and spread crazily, almost enveloping the entire arena. Boundless and tyrannical origin substance rippled outwards, making it hard for everyone to breathe. Huaishur, who was close at hand, couldn't bear the aftermath of the sadness. He could only rejoice from the bottom of his heart that he didn't fight to the death with such an opponent but had a chef-demon duel. Otherwise, the one who lost and died would most likely be him, right? Huaishur had always known that Eliza was a powerhouse, but he didn't expect that she could be so strong. Even among Tier 4, there were very few people who could be comparable to her, right? As expected of the explorer who won the Lone Wolf medal, Ms. Eliza. Huaishur raised his head, drank the last drop of Sangran's sake in the porcelain bottle, and sighed softly. This determination and this strength are really awe-inspiring. Bang! A shattering sound sounded. It was the wail of sadness being defeated. Cracks appeared on the countless chains, and the shackles of the sorrowful rope collapsed. In front of Eliza's raised eyes, an ocean-like torrent emerged from the emaciated body. The phantom of the skinny ferryman emerged from the torrent of the river Styx, looking down indifferently at the mortal world. In an instant it disappeared without a trace with the rushing river Styx. Sharon. Roman genealogy, Tier 4, River Styx ferryman, Sharon. Eliza raised her eyes, took a deep breath, clenched her fists slightly, and the net of chains collapsed in an instant. Now, Huaishe could finally understand how she carried the ruler's curse. Because this woman was really unreasonably strong. Just by relying on determination, he could defeat his own sorrow. Relying on her own strength, she could bear the ruler's curse. If you have such strength, why don't you go kill people and rob them? Why do you have to work? Huaishe shook his head with regret, feeling despair about this overly fantastical world. I have to admit, Miss Huaishe, Eliza raised her eyes and sighed solemnly, you are an opponent that I can't defeat with alcohol. From this round onwards, I will really start to use the bartender's means. Me too. Huaishe responded with a smile. I have found your weakness, Miss Eliza. Then let's have a showdown, Miss Huaishe. Eliza smiled, raised her hand, and took off the ring on her left index finger. At that moment, darkness that was thousands of times stronger than before gushed out from her 5 fingers. The curse of death instantly shrouded the entire audience, making it difficult for everyone to breathe. And from the illusion of ashes, the ruler who had already died raised his eyes and stared at the mortal world. That was the reflection left behind by the last existence. Just its existence was enough to freeze people's horror. In the beer barrel in front of Eliza, the valve opened, and a cup of dark beer with pale foam appeared in the glass. And between the 5 fingers of Eliza's left hand, in the small glass, endless malice appeared in the color of vodka. The sorrow was condensing into a curse. Together with the small glass, it fell into the dark beer. There was just a soft puff. That was the dull sound of death falling. Deep water. No, this is the abyss bomb specially customized for you. She stared at the smiling woman in front of her and said softly, Please enjoy, Miss Huaishe. For a strong opponent like you, there should be such an honor. Chapter 658. A deathly silence suddenly descended. Outside the arena, even the cooking demons were speechless. That cup of pitch-black beer was placed on the counter, as if it occupied the center of the world, pulling everyone's gaze, not allowing them to look away. Just by looking, they felt a wave of drowsiness and drowsiness. This was just a weak influence that could not even be considered as a remnant wave. That precious and terrifying calamity had already been condensed into the cup of beer. Once it was released, perhaps not only the underground plaza, even the manor and the entire mountain would be swallowed by the aura from hell. It did not pursue deliciousness, but turned to extreme lethality and corrosiveness. This was without a doubt the abyss bomb. What is going on, Elder Jiangquan? Behind the curtain, the black-toothed official also panicked. Why would such a dangerous thing appear in the cooking demon duel? Quickly make them stop. Please forgive this one for not being able to do so. The old Quan Jiang bowed his head, expressionlessly begging for forgiveness. All of this is in accordance with the rules of the Imperial Cooking Demon Duel. Moreover, even if you want those 2 contestants to stop, they would definitely not be willing, right? The foreign cooking demons are all arrogant people who have no respect for their seniors. Who knows, they might offend Sir's jade body. Truly lacking in respect, I am representing the Emperor. Could it be that Elder Jiangquan has no respect for the Emperor? Don't be too impudent. Then, another mocking voice rang out, left and right, they are just trash who have never seen anything. Since they are the Emperor's emissaries, they should obediently straighten their backs and watch the competition. Such a weak person will probably not be able to stay in the general's tent for even a day. Vulgar martial artist, what did you say? Haven't I made myself clear enough? Could it be that you want me to recite a poem for you? In the quarrel between the two, Quan Jiang still did not have any expression. He lowered his head like a stone man, allowing both sides to mock and criticize him, respectfully nodding his head. And the competition continued. Truly terrifying. Miss Huaiji lowered her head, gazing at the abyss bubble floating in the pitch-black beer, feeling reverence from the bottom of her heart. I wonder how many deaths are needed to create such a spectacular scene? In the beer bubbles, countless withered corpses appeared for a brief moment before quickly dissipating. It was death, the remains left behind by death. The traces left behind by destruction. You should be able to understand, right? Compared to quantity, quality is the true essence. Now, in the darkness, he was like a demon in hell. Eliza smiled. Don't you want to taste it? If I had known, I would have cheated too. Huai Shi sighed softly. He reached out and held the handle of the beer glass. He finally felt the evil consequences of his overconfidence. No matter what, we shouldn't give up the initiative. He had initially thought that it was a formidable opponent, but who would have thought that his opponent was no longer a formidable opponent, but a T-Rex in disguise? However, this was still within the acceptable range. How could the archaeological team order her to take a break and forbid her from entering hell again be someone easy to get along with? You'll suffer if you look down on others. This is a lesson. Eliza looked at her eyes and solemnly told her for the last time, admit defeat, Miss Huaiji. It's just a duel. There's no need to gamble your life. I don't want to kill you. Do you think so? Then my chances of winning seem to be a little higher. Huaiji Suzy smiled, raised her eyes and told her, thank you for your mercy, Eliza. But, aren't you also looking down on me? Before she finished speaking, she picked up the beer glass. She drank the crystal of disaster that was filled with the purification of hell in one gulp. She embraced death. It was as if she had hugged the past countless times. The last malicious essence from the former ruler, the curse of death, erupted from Huai Shi's body at that moment and swallowed everything. His movements came to an abrupt stop. In his hand, the fragile beer glass silently weathered into dust. Only a drop of remaining wine fell to the ground, instantly corroding through the table, down, through the iron and stone floor, and finally into the deep ground. It disappeared. The entire underground square was suddenly illuminated by a red alarm light, and a sharp and ear-piercing sound burst forth. The ultra-large depth stabilizer sounded an alarm that it could not bear the burden. Under the corrosion of this drop of wine, it could not maintain the depth of the reality. This can't be considered cooking anymore, right? In the audience stand, old cooking demon Gua shook his head and sighed. What's the difference between this crude use and a bomb? Why don't all the young people these days study their culinary skills? He raised his foot and casually kicked a bamboo basket under his feet, opening a gap. In the darkness of the bamboo basket, a huge shadow appeared. Immediately after, an invisible gravitational force pulled all the leaked abyss sediment and floated into the bamboo basket. Soon it was silent. In the silence, only Miss Huaiji Suzy remained sitting in place. Under the slender body, the crisp sound of porcelain cracking could be heard. The face suddenly shattered. After the cracked face, darkness gushed out, turning into a violent waterfall that spread out. Endless disasters emerged from his body with the curse, causing Huai Shi's soul to tremble. It was drowned and began to slowly dissolve. On Huaiji Suzy's exposed skin, countless ferocious eyes opened in an instant and looked in all directions. As the safety index soared rapidly, he felt the deepest pain from his soul. Solidification. He was rapidly solidifying. He had only swallowed a cup of beer, but the curse from the ruler had already wrapped around his soul. Even the crow tide couldn't touch it. It went deep into his bones and spread to every corner of his consciousness. The terrifying gravitational force was pulling at him. It was pulling him deeper into hell. Now, the crack leading to the abyss had been opened. Endless darkness gushed out of his broken body like a waterfall. It quickly polluted the surrounding environment. On the arena, the depth began to decrease again. It was as if he was pulling the entire arena, no, the entire mountain range, and even half of Nara into hell with him. After the cracked face, countless vines and flowers appeared and spread out along the crack, swaying and dancing. The strange plants that flourished in the abyss absorbed all the precipitation around them and grew rapidly. Behind Miss Huaiji Suzy, her shadow was rapidly expanding and changing shape. It changed from a human to a more violent state. In the end, the violent shadow completely broke through the restraints of the arena and shrouded the entire underground space. A wild and violent aura covered everyone's heart. It was the form of Huaishir falling into hell. But what kind of person could turn into such a terrifying state after solidifying? It was as if she wanted to devour the whole world. A terrifying aura slowly rose from the ever-changing shadows. Then, endless darkness gathered and condensed into a sacred and solemn crown and a bare back above the shadows. Inside Miss Huaiji Suzy's empty shell, the soul that had merged with miracle was rapidly transforming into a disaster. The violent will sleeping in Huaishir's soul was finally awakened. The existence called the End Dragon cast an indifferent glance at the mortal world. It was ferocious. Guards! Someone come quickly. This is an emergency. Seal off the arena immediately. High up in the stands, a shrill and terrified voice was shouting, "Hurry up! Get rid of that damn thing before it solidifies!" The door opened with a bang. The soldier monks, whose faces were shrouded in white, answered the summons. But their movements stopped abruptly. Not only because of the cold gazes of the cooking demons, but also because of a wriggling arm that stretched out from the bamboo basket beside Guashuk's feet. It had a sticky texture like tentacles and was amorphous like liquid. But the slender arm was full of sharp teeth. Human teeth, beast teeth, insect teeth, fish teeth. All the teeth that humans could imagine were gathered on the liquid-like arm. It stopped in front of the soldier monk. The battle between the cooking demons is not over yet. The old cooking demon withdrew his gaze from the arena and looked back arrogantly. "You guys, are you trying to interfere with the competition? Ha, you're not even as good as a girl. Don't come out and make a fool of yourself." She was still sitting in her seat. She did not scream or feel uneasy. She looked around blankly. It seemed that she did not understand what was going on at all. Miss Huaiji Suzy's sound and light effects are so powerful. Isn't she about to win? Why are you guys so panicked? This is not the place for you to flaunt your seniority, Guashuk. Behind the curtain on the stands, someone angrily questioned, "If Nara is hurt, can you take responsibility? Your place has nothing to do with me." Guashuk raised his head, and a mocking smile appeared on his wrinkled face. To be exact, to this old man. I don't need to feel pity for trash like you who can't even be cooked. But this old man still mercifully saved you. He grinned and laughed arrogantly. Don't you Ingzhou people know how to be grateful? Old thing, what nonsense are you talking about? Idiots. The muscular cooking demon Flaminical raised his head and glanced at them disdainfully. Look, even this sand barbarian can't stand it anymore. Guashuk laughed gloatingly. He did not pity them at all. Just as they said, Guashuk had saved them. Although this old ghost did not want to save anyone at all. But, if this group of soldier monks rushed in and interfered with the battle between the cooking demons, it would be really bad. Once Huaiji Suzy lost control, except for a few cooking demons, everyone here would die without a burial place. Besides, it's not over yet, is it? Guashuk looked at the rapidly cracking and breaking figure. He laughed strangely, and his eyes shone with excitement. She actually swallowed them all? What an enviable appetite! At that moment, in the arena, the broken silhouette that had been stiff for a long time finally raised its head in the darkness. Under the broken face, the corners of its mouth curled up slightly. As if it was smiling. It let out a long breath. Its lips opened and closed, silently praising its opponent. Good wine. Then, it was as if time had turned back. The waterfall of darkness that gushed out from Huai Ji Suzi's body instantly froze in the arena. Then, it began to reverse and shrink inwards. All the flowers and plants that grew and multiplied welcomed the transformation as they shrank. Little by little, they merged with the darkness into the gradually closing silhouette. In the end, the crack closed. It was as if nothing had happened. It was just a short sleep. Her beautiful face was still perfect and flawless. Only behind her, the ferocious silhouette of the final dragon slowly opened its eyes. It took one last look at this shallow mortal world, and withdrew its gaze in boredom. It quickly shrank back to its original shape. After a long time, Huai Shi opened his eyes. He slowly woke up from this inverted dream that was comparable to a hangover. Under the illusion, the face belonging to him slowly curved up, and along with the paper in his arms and Suzy, a smile appeared on his face. The two pairs of completely different eyes overlapped and quickly became blurry. Then, Huai Ji Suzy slowly raised her head and expressed her sincere gratitude to Eliza. "Thank you for your hospitality, I am very grateful." Eliza didn't know if it was an illusion or something, but in the silence she suddenly felt that in front of her, this opponent, who was originally like a beauty in a painting, had become alive. It was as if he had finally walked out of the painting. "Is there any change?" Her fingers flicked slightly under the bar counter, and she stared at the opponent in front of her, trying to distinguish any signs of solidification. But she felt that she couldn't see anything. If she felt that she was looking at an empty shell before, now she felt that this empty shell was hidden in the fog. She couldn't even determine whether the other party really existed. "Thanks to you, I have grown a little, right?" Huai Shi smiled emotionally and looked at the remains of the beer glass in his hand. "I'm really full, I'm afraid I can't drink anymore." This was a work created by the curse of grief, and it was indeed the abyss bomb. Once swallowed, it was as if a whole hell had exploded in his stomach. He was about to burst his limit, and even the crows in the cage of dreams were almost drunk to death. Even if he had a little more, he wouldn't be able to continue drinking. The disaster created by the ruler's curse imprint was too huge. Even Huai Shi almost solidified several times in the process. But unfortunately, he lingered on the edge of solidification too many times. His experience was too rich. What was more coincidental was that he was wearing a smuff that was specially used to replace himself being eroded by the abyss. The non-existent phantom, Huai Shi Suzy, welcomed growth in this disaster. It was just like those scam games that said something like elite transformation, spiritual base rebirth, first stage advancement, and so on. The old limitations were broken, and the value was increased. The degree of solidification of the phantom greatly increased. Unfortunately, the biggest change was also like a scam game. The card face was more beautiful. Dazed cat. JPG now, Eliza stared at this extremely strange opponent who couldn't see the depth of her strength and finally warned her, "I can make 3 more glasses of this wine." "I know," Huai Shi Suzy said, "but you won't have the chance to make the next one. After this round is over, you will admit defeat." She repeated her words and smiled. A trace of awe-inspiring solemnity was revealed in the past coquettish and charming, "because I have found your weakness." The forging furnace was activated again. This time, a pure and sacred light rose from the sake, illuminating the pair of dark eyes like the abyss. Just like this, she held the small wine glass with both hands and presented her final work so kindly and respectfully. "It's time for the sun to rise, Ms. Eliza," she asked. "Are you ready to welcome the dawn?" Chapter 659. It was a thin cup of wine that was called dawn. It illuminated Eliza's pupils, and the gentle and pure light was rippling in faint ripples without any lethality. Just by smelling it, one could feel the strong fragrance of incense. Holy praises surrounded her ears. Whether it was Eliza or the cooking demons outside, they were all stunned. Even if an acolyte were to look at it, they would be able to easily tell that there was no malice in it. In other words, it was simply a cup of medicinal wine for healing. But now, this thin light of dawn made Eliza fall into silence. After a long time, her eyes slightly raised. She sighed softly. "So despicable, Miss Huiji. That's too sad. Do I look like such a despicable person?" Huisher spread out his hands and asked doubtfully, "Although I was forced to swallow the abyss bomb, you see, there is actually no anger or resentment in this cup of wine. I hope it's that kind of thing. But I'm not that kind of person." Huisher smiled. "Compared to blood debts, I prefer to repay evil with good. A long time ago, a big sister once told me that love can conquer everything, and I deeply believe it. Only by sharing generously and selflessly can I get the other party's reward. In the end, everyone was very grateful to me." He paused for a moment and said seriously, "I believe you will too." Being stared at by such a calm and warm gaze, Eliza did not feel relaxed at all. Instead, her whole body tensed up. It was as if she was being stared at by something terrible. She felt as if there was a knife at her back. Repay evil with good? Love conquers everything? Share generously and selflessly? This kind of line would be outdated in Jump 20 years ago, but now it made people shudder. It was precisely because she knew what this cup of dawn represented that she could feel the hidden malice in it, even if this cruel and cold malice was not in the wine. This feeling of being caught in a trap of my own making is really not good. Eliza sighed self-deprecatingly. She raised her hand and held the small porcelain cup between Miss Huiji's hands. Then, she drank it in one gulp. The clear amber liquid entered his throat, bringing with it a wonderful fragrance. The aroma hidden under the alcohol was gently aroused, and a thick fog of rich fragrance passed through his throat. In his stomach, a warm taste spread out, and his entire body felt warm. It was like soaking in a hot spring. Not only was her spirit refreshed, even the old injuries in her body began to heal quickly. Originally, it should be like this. If it was anyone else, it should be like this. Anyone but her, after she shed her gentle and harmless appearance, this overly sharp hypocrisy finally revealed its sharpness in her heart. Her expression stiffened for a moment, and she stood still. But right after that, the sharp sound of steel scraping against each other burst forth. Even though it was sealed off by flesh and blood, it became so oppressive. Eliza's body. In the astonished exclamation of the audience, a sharp sword of light pierced through her back obliquely, stained with sticky blood, and pointed to the ceiling. Then the second one. It pierced through the vest in front of her chest, and came out from the position of her heart, cutting her arm. Wisps of darkness quickly flew out from the wound that had been pierced through. But it couldn't cover the huge flame running in her body. It was like the sun slowly rising at dawn. The tyrannical light swept away all the darkness and evil. The third one, the fourth one, the fifth one, the sharp sound was endless. In an instant, thousands of swords pierced through her heart. A large amount of blood spurted out from the broken body. The viscous scarlet flowed along the blade, almost completely covering the area behind the bar counter. The sharp sword blades intertwined with each other, becoming a cold cage. It almost completely tore her body apart. A beauty in such a tragic situation in an instant, even the coldest person would not be able to bear it. They could empathize with this painful torture. The pure origin substance of the sword of virtue operated in Eliza's body, taking root and sprouting like a plant. It destroyed from the inside out in the most violent and decisive way. Except for a certain large husky, no matter how strong a creature was, its internal organs and intestines would not grow a carapace in an instant. She suffered such a tragic injury. Eliza did not fall. She was still tenaciously standing. This might be a heavy injury to a fourth-level ascendant, but to her, it was not enough to threaten her life. Ascendants who had stepped into the star antimony stage had already become the incarnation of the sacred mark. To Sharon, who was wandering on the river Styx, the flesh and blood body was nothing more than a burden. As long as Eliza was willing, she could transform into a state of burning origin substance at any time and truly become Charon's incarnation. This kind of heavy injury was not worth mentioning. She stretched out her hand, holding the sword in front of her chest, and her 5 fingers slightly tightened. Between her 5 fingers, the sharp blade of light shattered and was pulled out by her, quickly dissipating into the air. Then, a second, a third, not long after, her hands, which were covered in cracks, pulled out all the blades from her body, crushed them, and threw them away. The bloodied Orisa raised her head, the wounds all over her body quickly closing. Her skin healed, her blood flowed backwards, and her internal organs returned. Apart from the tears in her vest and trousers, nothing else could be seen. Huaishi's attack had not affected her in the slightest. But this could not be considered an attack. At most, it was just a side effect of the treatment. "Are you feeling better?" Huaishi Suzy asked with concern. "To be honest, it's terrible." Eliza lowered her head, staring at her healed hands. Her 10 fingers clenched slightly. A shattering sound came from within her body. A low sound, like the sound of a stone slab cracking, continuously rang out. It was as if the cracks in a thick mountain had begun to spread, and it began to collapse. After her illness was healed, she temporarily did not have the burden of her injuries, and her strength erupted without any hindrance. In an instant, a terrifying aura descended upon the arena. It was as if the ferryman of the underworld river had personally arrived, coldly selecting the souls in front of him. She had become even stronger. She no longer had the burden of the curse. Under the cleansing of the origin substance of the virtuous sword, the curse entangled in her bone marrow was completely swept away, and the damage it had caused was negligible. It did not cause any damage. It could be said that it had gently helped her sweep away the evil energy in her body. Huaishi had healed his enemy, but now this recovery had caused Eliza to stand on the edge of a cliff. On the silver bracelet on her right wrist, a blood-colored gem slowly lit up, emitting a red warning light, repeatedly reminding her of just how dangerous her current situation was. This was the destruction brought about by kindness and love. At the same time, it was also Eliza's greatest weakness. She had given Huaishi too many opportunities. She was too soft-hearted towards beauties, but at the same time, she was too confident in her own skills and strength. Indeed, Charon's strength allowed her to calmly retreat even when facing a 5th-level ascendant. When traversing the infernal realm, she would never get lost because of the depth. And her outstanding skills made her even more powerful, allowing her to retreat unscathed after entering dangerous ruins several times. But the premise of all this was that she had not been cursed by the ruler. Thanks to him, the current Eliza had been forced to rest, and could not enter any infernal realm. Even the Continuation Academy was unable to resolve the curse that had penetrated deep into her bone marrow. They could only make both sides coexist in a balanced state after modifying her. Not long ago, she looked like she had been infected by a curse. That was the safest state she could be in. But now, a slight tilt appeared on the balance that had been carefully maintained. A friction that should not have appeared in the complicated and harmonious mechanical structure. The moment this reckless kindness healed her, the balance was broken. An ant's nest appeared on the dam. As for how serious the consequences would be, it might not necessarily be. At most, it would only weaken the seal on the curse slightly. But this was enough to trigger a state of alert. If she dared to use any cooking demon skills again, the loophole in the seal would rapidly expand and extend. Once the balance was broken, the tilt would only become faster and faster, and in the end, there would be no room for recovery. The ruler's curse would be completely leaked. At that time, not only herself, but even the entire Nara would be implicated. This was not a crisis that a cup of abyss bomb could compare to. In the silence, Eliza sighed and suddenly said, "I can still continue." "I know." Huaishi nodded, You are in excellent condition now. If you want to decide the victor, I have absolutely no chance of winning. However, when it comes to shameless fighting, I am very confident." He thought for a moment and raised 3 fingers. "If you don't care about the consequences, then I don't have to worry about it," Miss Huaishur told her. "I can last 3 rounds before losing." Eliza was unmoved. "Even if the curse is leaked, it might not be as bad as you think. I also know." Huaishur nodded. "At best, there is a hidden danger. You have the possibility of winning, 90%, no, more than 90%, but your sense of responsibility will not allow you to bear the consequences of failure." Speaking of this, he couldn't help but sigh. "I'm sorry, Ms. Eliza. Although moral kidnapping is despicable, it is really useful for people like you." Eliza did not answer. Perhaps, compared to the ruler's curse, this was Eliza's biggest weakness. From the beginning, when she revealed that she was a member of the archaeological team, Huaishur already knew. It was true that many of the explorers in the abyss were lunatics with deep self-destructive tendencies and lunatics thirsting for disaster, but at the same time, there were also a large number of people who were not like this. Instead, they chose to go to hell with the love of this world in their hearts. A dignified fourth-order sublimator, the elite and elite of the archaeological team, actually worked for this kind of trash for money. Even in the face of an opponent like himself, she repeatedly showed mercy. This Ms. Eliza was too gentle. In the end, was this weakness caught? Eliza laughed self-deprecatingly and shook her head. She raised her hand and took out a bottle of whiskey from the wine cabinet. She raised her hand and casually poured it into a glass. After the burning pine wood flashed past, it coated the wine with a light layer of smoke. Finally, she casually threw 2 cherries into the glass. She didn't use any cooking skills at all, it was just an ordinary bartending. She placed it in front of Huaishur. "Until the end, I still haven't let you taste the real bartending. It's a bit unreconciled to just leave like this, so I'll treat it as a gift. Try it." She picked up a glass and drank it in one gulp. Huaishur was stunned for a moment. He picked up the glass and sniffed it carefully. The fragrance of pine wood and the unique peat smell of whiskey mixed together, and the marinated cherries exuded a sweet smell, making the fruity and floral fragrance even more rich. It was unbelievably fresh. When tasting and sipping, he could feel the strong taste of whiskey and the sweetness of cherries spreading in the mouth, slowly swallowing. In the end, the slightly sour taste brought by the chewing of cherries perfectly covered the slightly bitter aftertaste of the whiskey. "It's really a good wine." Huaishur couldn't help but exclaim, "What's the name?" "Let me think. Let's call it Smoky Cherries." Eliza smiled. "How does it taste?" "Wonderful." Huaishur nodded in agreement. This was a field that his half-baked wine couldn't touch. "Anything else?" he asked. "You have to drink in moderation. If you really want to be happy, 1 glass is enough. Besides, the competition is over, isn't it?" Eliza smoked and suddenly smiled slyly. She leaned close to his ear and whispered softly, "Actually, you also exposed a weakness, Miss Huaishur. I've heard Lucian talk about the similar source substance in that glass of dawn many times. It reminds me of your background, the ivory tower, and your skills." At that moment, Huaishur was stunned. Eliza, on the other hand, had already seen through his deepest disguise and saw the secret that he wanted to hide. She whispered softly in his ear with a smile, "I really didn't expect that you are Huaishur." In an instant, Huaishur felt like he was struck by lightning. He almost didn't hear the second half of her sentence. "Mistress, right?" A bolt from the blue flashed. After the feint, Huaishur only felt countless question marks rising from his head. He was stunned. "What are you talking about?" Widening her eyes in disbelief, Miss Huaishur opened her mouth in shock. She was stunned for a long time before she reacted. She didn't know whether she should be angry or glad. She could only raise her hand and point at her face in grief and indignation. "Do I look like a mistress to you?" "Who knows?" Eliza smiled strangely inside. I didn't expect a beauty like Miss Huaishur would fall in love with such a scumbag. How is Mr. Huaishur a scumbag? He doesn't even have a girlfriend yet. When it came to his reputation and 18 years of innocence, Huaishur refuted angrily. But then, he saw Eliza's eyes became more and more strange. She looked at Miss Huaishur in front of her, and the corners of her mouth slowly raised. Soon Takashi, you still say that you don't know martial arts? Huaishur couldn't spit out a mouthful of blood. He couldn't defend himself. What is this? I'm seducing myself? Refuting is guilty, and not arguing is admitting it. Both sides are blocked. Anyway, the title of mistress is really dead. Can't you bunch of onlookers have some conscience? However, I won't use this to threaten you. I'm already in my 30s. What haven't I seen? Don't be embarrassed. Eliza raised her hand, patted her shoulder, and said earnestly, however, you have to be careful. All the gifts given by fate will be secretly marked with a price. Some men look pure, cute, and serious, but in fact, once they take off their clothes, you don't know what kind of big-tailed wolf they are. Miss Huaishur, a beauty who looks cold but is actually pure, is the easiest to be played by that kind of scumbag. Sorry, I haven't fallen to the extent of falling in love with a smurf. Please don't worry about it, and don't say that I'm a pervert, okay? Huaishur was speechless. He could only be silent awkwardly and look into the distance. He silently mourned his reputation that had fallen into the abyss. He cried silently in his heart. After all, if there was a choice, who would want to be a mistress? Then, big sister bartender's relationship consultation ends here. Finally, Eliza raised her finger and handed over a business card. She winked at her. If your feelings are hurt, you are welcome to complain to me at any time. By the way, you are my type, so I can give you a discount. That rather hot and appreciative gaze made the back of Huaishur's head jump, and he felt cold all over. But on second thought, it didn't seem to be a bad thing, right? Why can't I stick close to the blonde big sister when I'm pregnant? When he reacted, he seemed to have accepted the business card. Eliza had already patted the table, causing the workbench to shrink instantly and return to the rapidly closing suitcase. She took a coat from the last clothes hanger and put it on to cover the wound left by the sword. She picked up the suitcase and left. Hey Eliza, where are you going? Just outside the arena, in the audience, the middle-aged man with a livid face couldn't help scolding in unison, What the hell are you doing? Could it be that you've been bribed as well? Sorry boss, as you can see, I can't win against her. Eliza shrugged calmly. Even if you are not happy, please don't slander my professional ethics, okay? You can obviously win. Yeah, but if I win, it doesn't mean that you will win. Eliza sighed. If I continue to fight with her, even if I win, half of Nara will completely disappear. Do you know what the consequences of such an ending will be for you? You. Riken Mickey's expression twitched, and he couldn't speak. Don't worry, I will refund you half of the money, but the credit card part can't be refunded. If you doubt it and want to get it back, I can only wait for my next month's salary to pay you back slowly. Goodbye. She waved her hand calmly and said goodbye to her employer. Eliza left the arena suavely, all the way through the corridor, walked out of the basement, and politely declined Riken's offer to drive her back. She walked out of the door and turned the corner. Then, he suddenly bent down and supported himself against the wall. Then, he vomited. Ugh! The undigested matter with a strong smell of alcohol fell to the ground awkwardly and piled up into a pool. Wisps of vicious black smoke lingered around it, and something was wriggling in it. It was faintly bloody. In the end, after vomiting, her makeup was a little messy. She took out a tissue from her pocket, wiped the tears, snot, and dirt from the corners of her mouth. Then she took out a bottle of water and skillfully rinsed her mouth. She lit a cigarette and finally breathed a sigh of relief, showing exhaustion. The most important rule of drinking to determine the winner. Maintain your poise until the last moment. In the end, I almost capsized in a ditch. If I knew it, I wouldn't have tried to be strong. Wouldn't it be over if I just admitted defeat? She helplessly gave advice in hindsight. She smoked, gritted her teeth, and endured the twitching of her internal organs. Life was like a play, and it all depended on acting skills. The damage caused by Huai Shi in the first 2 rounds was far greater than he had imagined. After all, not everyone had the terrifying abyss endurance and recovery ability of a certain cowherd. Moreover, not everyone's head could be intact after being hit by the axe of wrath more than a dozen times, sealed by the rope of sorrow, and repeatedly pierced by the sword of virtue. Heavy injuries. It was a serious injury. Fortunately, the opponent was still young and was fooled by her. Unfortunately, it still didn't change the final result. Eliza shook her head helplessly, took out an old-fashioned folding phone from her pocket, and dialed the emergency number. Hello? Is this the Continuation Academy? Your broken seal has leaked. Yes, it's the same as my aunt, bleeding. Come and pick me up. The moment the phone hung up, a light fell from the sky. She disappeared on the spot. 2 seconds later, another light fell from the sky and swept away the vomit on the ground. There were no more traces in front of the gate of the Rigian family's manor. Only the cigarette that fell on the ground calmly flickered, and the smoke dissipated in the wind. Just like that, holding on to the last of her poise and elegance, the bartender Eliza left. Imperial Chef Demon tried it out. The winner, Huai Shi Suzy. Chapter 660. There was an anxious atmosphere in the quiet room. During the long wait, Ray Jian Bujing sat in his seat, holding the phone in his hand in annoyance. There were several times when he couldn't help but want to call and urge him. But in the end, he endured it. He tried his best to restrain his ugly expression and calm himself down, but sweat continued to seep out from his forehead. He was anxious. He resisted the urge to get angry and forced himself to wait. Until the sound of low footsteps came from outside the door, the young samurai pushed the door and entered. Ray Jian Jing knelt respectfully on the tatami and bowed his head to greet Ray Jian Bujing. Thank you for waiting for so long, uncle. Jingjiang, what are you doing, Jiu Jing? Ray Jian Bujing subconsciously wanted to get angry, but in the end, he took a deep breath and asked anxiously, What should I do? That person is not like what you said at all. What the hell is going on here? Now someone has asked me to give up the shares and position of the Kanzan group. That's not what we said at the beginning. It's just a group of fence-sitters who want to add insult to injury. For uncle, this is just dust falling from the roof beam. Don't worry about it. You just need to calm down and wait for the limelight to pass. But what about that bastard Jin Shi? Ray Jian Bujing asked angrily. I personally ordered people to threaten her. Can this matter be settled? No, I have to go and lie low for a while. I can go to America or the Russian Federation. Jingjiang, you must have connections. Hurry up and arrange it immediately. I can help you there. It's not that bad yet, uncle. Jiu Jing raised his voice and interrupted his words. He finally raised his lowered eyes. A ray of sharp light shot out from his slender eyes, like a sharp blade, making Ray Jian Bujing's expression stiffen. Please don't worry, uncle, you are harmless. He still said respectfully, they won't do anything to you, and neither will Zhen Shi. In fact, a person like you is really useless. If you encounter any trouble, you can just surrender and resign from your current position. Take the money you have earned over the years and find a small place to retire. No one will think you are a threat. In the silence, Li Jiu Yojing's expression twitched. The hands that fell on his knees pinched the custom-made suit into ugly creases. His face was ashen. Jingjiang, I'm your biological father. He angrily rebuked. Don't you know anything about gratitude? My name is Richimi Kushizu, uncle. My father is Richimi Kushizu, since 8 years ago when you gave me away for the sake of power. Seeing that Jiu Jing was still calm, his tone didn't fluctuate at all. He just told him flatly, Since you've already obtained power, please don't be sentimental about the things you've sold. Now that things had come to this point, what was the point of talking about something as laughable as gratitude? Aren't you the one who asked me to serve my foster father like my own father? Ridgian Boojing gritted his teeth, the veins on his forehead bulging. But as he stared at his own son, he did not have the strength to be angry. He asked softly, almost as if he was begging. Why are you so heartless, Jing River? Then, thank you for your hospitality. I'll take my leave now, uncle. Jiu Jing slowly got up and bowed. Just before he left, he looked back one last time and told him, "Don't worry, as long as you stay here obediently, nothing will happen to you. Just take it as the last benevolence your former son is showing you." The paper door was pulled shut. The low sound of footsteps gradually faded into the distance. In the quiet room, Richimi Boojing sat paralyzed on the ground, stunned. He didn't have the strength to get up. His face was ashen. Until the footsteps outside the door sounded again. He was stunned for a moment. Then, he got up in surprise, pushed open the door and rushed over. "I knew you would come back, Jing River. You wouldn't let go of your biological son." Outside the door, the female attendant whose wrist was grabbed by him was stunned. She stared at him blankly. "Mr. Boojing, Master Jiu Jing ordered me to clean up the corridor. I'm sorry, I'll leave now." "Sorry to disturb you." She couldn't help but panic when she was stared at by the pair of eyes that were gradually turning ferocious. She ran away pathetically. In the silence, Richimi Boojing was left alone on the ground. His expression gradually became distorted. Both of you are like this. One day, all of you will pay the price." He roared angrily at the empty corridor. "Do you think that the shameful things you have done can escape the eyes of others?" No one responded. Only after a long time did he finally calm down. He made up his mind. Escape. He had to escape from this house. After losing his power, this place had become a tiger's den. Even his former biological son would abandon him like a worn-out shoe. He had never expected his so-called family to be merciful. After making up his mind, he hurriedly left. He called the driver. 10 minutes later, a car silently drove out of the back door and disappeared into the night. "We're not going to the capital. We're going to Sanchong." Richimi Boojing calmed down and ordered the driver. Then, he took out his phone and dialed a number. Fortunately, he had cultivated many subordinates in other places. Otherwise, he didn't know how tragic this situation would be. He couldn't stay in the Richimi family anymore. He didn't even want to stay in Yingzhou. He would go to Sanchong, then go through the border transit and change his appearance. After a while, he would let a substitute dress up as him and go to the Russian Federation. Then, he would go directly to America from Shinjiport. In America, he still had a foundation that was enough for him to make a comeback. After going through every step of the plan repeatedly and confirming that there were no flaws, he fell asleep. Soon, he woke up with a start. The car slowed down abruptly. He suddenly opened his eyes. "What's wrong?" "Sir, there seems to be a car accident in front. The road is blocked." The driver stuck his head out of the window and stared at the roadblock not far away. He didn't know what had happened. In the next moment, his head suddenly tilted from its original position. It hung on his neck by a little bit of flesh. Blood spurted out. He died in a daze. Richimi Boojing screamed. Outside the car window, in the deep night, there was a burning flame. A ferocious warrior covered in heavy armor and dyed red with blood appeared outside the car window. The cold visor drooped slightly, and the indifferent eyes looked down at Richimi's twisted face. In his hand, the katana was slowly raised and slashed down. The steel twisted and wailed. The bulletproof car was easily torn apart and broken into two halves. The burning warrior stepped forward and approached the limp Richimi step by step. Behind the visor, the pair of eyes also burned with a ghostly light, full of resentment and ferocity. This is impossible, this is not right, Richimi screamed in horror. Why is it you? It should be. The blade slashed down. Slash. This was the last scene that Richimi Bujing saw. Huaishur felt like he had a dream. He returned to the familiar darkness. A quiet sleep. Only the ripples of the source substance reverberated in his soul, intertwining in the rapidly growing destiny and activating some mechanism hidden under the surface of the water. It caused his consciousness and memories to constantly collide. His thoughts overlapped with each other without any rules, and incomplete images flashed without any warning. It was as if there was an invisible hand slowly selecting in his consciousness, skillfully activating one fragment after another, causing Huaishur's consciousness to operate and evolve on its own. In the end, it was just like the final conclusion of the calculation system in the black box. An inexplicable voice from the depths of his soul sounded in his ears. It came from Huaishur's consciousness, composed of Huaishur's thoughts, pure experience and enlightenment. That inexplicable feeling pulled at the floating words in his consciousness, and finally formed a question from a long time ago. Shiha has not risen, where is the light of Ruohua? Shiha, the goddess among the gods of Dongxiao in the past, the solemn sun wheel was her carriage, rising in the east and setting in the west with her every day, overlooking the mortal world. But now, the sun had not risen yet. How could there be light in this world? At that moment, light lit up in front of Huaishur's eyes. Once again, he saw the sparkling and majestic ocean, the source of all consciousness, souls, and wisdom in the world, the endless silver ocean. That unknown light led him to look down. His gaze penetrated the deep sea, illuminating the incomplete form of the White Queen. That magnificent and huge silhouette was quietly sleeping in the deepest part of the ocean. Just like the extinguished sun. The sun seemed to have extinguished. The moon rose from the sky. It was like a huge ball, round, just like when it was young. The faint light shone on the stone. The stone was white and the water was black. The wild grass and flowers in the courtyard emitted the fragrance of vegetation. There was the light of fireflies in the grass. The wind blew in the distant night. She sat in a rocking chair, looking around blankly. Soon, she realized that this was her dream. Lucid dream? The internet said that there is such a thing, right? She scratched her head in confusion and looked around the old wooden house behind her. Indeed, this was the place that left the deepest impression in her memory. In her childhood, when her grandmother and father were still alive, this was the small courtyard and house that protected them. Although it would occasionally leak when it rained, the sound of the water falling on the copper basin would be crisp. It was like a symphony. Symphony was a word she learned later, but she had never heard it once. It should be very powerful, right? Miss Huaiji seemed to know it very well. When she thought of this, she saw the figure sitting under the wooden porch under the moonlight. She looked up at the moonlight in the sky alone. The moonlight also became thinner, falling into her eyes, making her eyes glow. She was stunned for a long time, and then nodded in realization. Miss Huaiji was also in the dream? That was great, she suddenly felt happy. Chapter 661. Was it because they were thinking about each other, or was it because their minds were connected? Makoto didn't know the answer to that question, but she felt inexplicably happy when Haoki-san appeared in her dream. The Haoki-san in her dream was just like any other time. She was cold and aloof, making her seem unapproachable. But when she gathered her courage and sat next to her, she felt like she could feel her warmth. And when she gathered her courage and shortened the distance between them, she could feel their bodies touching. She held his hand. She was happy. Unfortunately, this Haoki-san didn't seem to know how to speak, nor did she react. Was her imagination too lacking? At this time, she should have used her willpower and imagined the domineering Haoki-san pushing her against the wall and lifting her chin with one hand. As she imagined this, Makoto began to laugh like a fool, saliva dripping from her mouth. Unfortunately, this didn't happen. Were dreams like this sometimes? Even if she knew that this was a dream, many things were difficult to change, such as the passionate Haoki-san. Although it was regrettable, she was satisfied with just this. Haoki-san, do you want to drink some tea? Drinking tea in a dream seems quite strange. Unfortunately, there aren't any books or anything else here. It's rare for you to come to my house, so why don't you take a look inside? Makoto said this to herself, then gathered her courage and pulled Haoki-san's hand. And then, Haoki-san stood up and stood to the side, as if waiting for her to show her around. Instead, Makoto's face suddenly flushed red. Bringing Haoki-san home, how should she describe it? She was so excited. Unfortunately, this place was no longer as warm as it used to be. I'm sorry, I didn't know that guests were coming. Even my dreams are so messy, I've had enough. After pushing open the wooden door, she saw that the floor was covered in dust. As expected, no one lived here for a long time, right? After my grandmother passed away, this place was abandoned. In the past, this place was carefully taken care of. I still remember that in the spring, there would be flowers placed in the vase at the entrance every day. Makoto sighed. Now, the vase at the entrance was broken, and there were only withered flowers left in it. It no longer had the fragrance of the past. In the living room, there were still traces of sunlight on the floor that had been covered by the furniture. Unfortunately, there was nothing left except for a broken chair, standing alone under the moonlight. Indeed, it's better not to look. Shinichi shook her head and turned around. Let's go somewhere else. Isn't this your home? This was the first time she heard Miss Huaiji speak in her dream. That figure walked past her and into the living room. She looked around curiously. Tell me, she said suddenly, the story of what happened here. Shinichi was stunned. After a long silence, she nodded her head vigorously. This chair was my grandmother's favorite chair when she was alive. She liked to sit here and look out the window. When he saw me, he waved at me. This gap is where my front teeth fell out when I was young. Most of the time, my mother would sit here and do some handicraft. Sometimes she would make a few dolls for me. Dad would come home very late every day, but sometimes when he was in a deep sleep, he would hear the sound of the door being pushed open at the entrance. Sometimes father would ask if Genshi was asleep, and sometimes mother would ask him to keep his voice down. Originally, there were pictures of my grandmother when she was young, my grandfather, and my mother when she was young. Later on, it was changed to pictures of me and my grandmother. After that, it was no longer hung here. It was as if she was showing off her treasures. Shinichi walked in her dream and wiped away the dust bit by bit. She told the only visitor about the past. In the end, in the empty bedroom, she blew away the dust on the canvas and saw the old graffiti in the mottled colors. This was actually left here? She held the frame and sighed softly. Then, she laughed softly. If only this wasn't a dream. I really want to bring it back. Is it something very precious? Miss Huaiji asked. You can say that. The girl sighed softly and looked at the faded traces of paint on the canvas. My father drew this for me. When I was young, I always said that I wanted to go to the big city that was mentioned on TV. In fact, I didn't even know what a big city looked like. I only knew that people there wore beautiful dresses, there were many cute dolls and toys, and there were endless candies. But what my father and mother said was different from what I thought. Later on, my father drew a picture for me one day. But the drawing was so ugly that I couldn't tell anything. This is it. She showed the frame in her hand. There were only blurry patches of color left on it, and it was difficult to tell what it looked like in the past. This is the sun, this is a tall building, and this should be a car, right? I don't remember what this is. It seems that my father forgot as well. Shinichi shook her head and whispered softly, My mother told me that Edo was like this. At dusk, the white buildings would be dyed pink, and the glass would emit a golden light. There are so many people on the streets that I can't even count them. Cars are driving in groups as if they are throwing a tantrum. I always thought that they were lying to me, but the first time I left Daoquan village, I realized that the outside world was exactly as they said. Miss Huaiji, have you been to other places? Other countries and borders? She turned around and asked curiously, someone as powerful as you must have been to other places, right? Miss Huaiji only looked at the picture frame in her hand and didn't answer. It was as if she was admitting it, but also as if she wasn't. She didn't know if she was listening. It was as if she was hidden in a fog, difficult to reach, and impossible to see clearly. But even if she was cold, there was a sense of reassurance. It was as long as she was by her side, she would never be afraid. When she held her hand, she felt warm, as if she was being illuminated by the sun. But if that was all, she felt that it wasn't enough. Because she was lonely. Shinichi looked up, wanting to say something, but stopped. He had never felt such a desire to know her better. She wanted to stand by her side more intimately, she wanted to be like Miss Huaiji. At that moment, the girl finally mustered up her courage. Miss Huaiji, then, she woke up from her dream. It was broken at the cruelest part. The girl opened her eyes on the bed, and looked at the pale ceiling in shock. She didn't know when her hand had reached out, as if she wanted to touch something, but she didn't touch anything. She was stunned. Below the Stone Marrow Museum, at some point in the basement, which was dozens of times larger than the surface, it was as large as a huge plaza. Tongi's hand paused for a moment, and she looked away from the projection of the Book of Destiny. She looked up and saw a small dot of light floating in front of her. Is this a believer? As if in disbelief, she was silent for a long time, then suddenly laughed softly. She didn't expect that in order to complete the substitute, after creating the reflection of Huaiji Suko, the divinity of the young master of destiny could be sprouted from the essence of her soul. And this divinity was even pointing in the direction of East Lord, faintly possessing the characteristics of she-he? No matter how deep her foundation was, wasn't this a little too much? What was this? Was it a surprise or a shock? This was really too interesting. Why sure, we are indeed the most compatible contractors in the world. She narrowed her eyes in pleasure, humming a vague and ancient tune. Behind her, the god's wedge floated quietly like the sun, glowing faintly. As soon as Huaishur opened his eyes, he sensed that something was wrong. Of course, it wasn't that he saw Huaiji Suko playing crow or something. Rather, he felt that something had changed. Something was different. Early in the morning, as he was brushing his teeth in a daze, he looked into the mirror and saw his own reflection. It had completely transformed into Huaiji Suko. This was a state that was close to completion. Huaishur's reflection had completely overlapped with Huaiji Suko's record. Through young Master of Destiny's reflection as a medium, she could be said to be the embodiment of Huaishur's origin substance. She could even take his place to complete some simple tasks. If it was just rapid progress, he wouldn't be so surprised. But who could tell him what that faint halo above his head in the mirror was? Heavens, I've become an immortal! He put down his toothbrush, dumbfounded, and raised his head to look above his head. Under the sunlight outside the window, the faint halo above his head glowed faintly. What was this thing? But when he reached out to touch it, the faint halo quickly dissipated. It was as if it had never existed. Just as he was rubbing his chin, thinking for a moment, calmly analyzing, and then making a call to angrily scold a certain black-hearted woman for doing something, his phone rang first. It was Hu Po's number. You did this. As soon as the call connected, an angry voice came from the other side. What? Huaishur was confused. What did I do now? Wait, did someone see what Huaiji Suko did last night? He lowered his head in shock and looked at his own reflection. He suddenly didn't know how to explain that his avatar seemed to have become sentient, and that there was an additional halo above his head. Who knew what kind of heartless thing had happened? He had just fallen asleep after a hangover. On the bright side, at least he didn't open his eyes like in the movies and have a baby next to his pillow. Then he really wouldn't be able to defend himself. Lianjian Bujing is dead. That's it? Hearing Hu Po's voice, Huai Shi subconsciously let out a sigh of relief. You scared me to death. I thought you were going to slander my innocence. Speaking of which, what does Lianjian Bujing's death have to do with Huai Ji Suko? You really didn't do it. Hu Po was still full of doubt. Why sure, we're grasshoppers on the same line. You don't need me to explain this logic, right? If you want to do something, you don't have to do it behind my back. Huai Shi couldn't help but roll his eyes. He already left. I was so drunk last night that I could barely walk. It's fine if you want me to take someone's virginity from thousands of miles away, but to chop a middle-aged uncle, do you think I'm crazy? Speaking of which, how did he die? Who did it? Who else could it be? Hu Po sighed with a headache. Of course it's Lianjian Bujing. At this moment, a candidate who left died. This matter has completely blown up. You have to be careful. Maybe the people from Looming Hall will come looking for you. If they come looking for you, don't say anything. Don't do anything unnecessary. I'll be there immediately. Are you sure? Huai Shi asked. What else? Hu Po was angry. Do you believe that if I don't do anything, how many people will be anxious to put this blame on your head? No, I don't have any suspicions. Huai Shi raised his head and looked in the direction of the door. What I mean is, if you want to be a defense lawyer, you can prepare now. In that instant, the door turned to dust with a loud bang. A burly figure wearing a bamboo hat rushed into the room and roared angrily. Surrender yourself, Huai Ji Suko, you murderous demon. Huai Shi shook his head and couldn't help but sigh. It's just that this doesn't look like they're here to talk nicely. Chapter 662. Logically speaking, at this time, Huai Shi should raise his hands and shout that he wanted to find a lawyer. Before the lawyer came, he wouldn't say a word. He wouldn't say a word until little Amber came to the Looming Hall to complain that they mistreated his client and he wanted to appeal or something. This should be the common plot. But the person who came to the door now didn't seem to be inviting him over for tea. Instead, it seemed that he was going to seize this opportunity to beat him to death. Miss Huai Ji, who had transformed in an instant, was still holding a toothbrush and a toothbrush cup in her hand, and a phone that hadn't been hung up on her neck. When she walked out of the bathroom, she saw a strange man who was as tall as a mountain. There was also a messy room. Excuse me, what's the matter? He sighed helplessly. If I've offended you in any way, just say it. Why do you have to shovel back and forth on your mother's grave like this? No one responded. Only in the rustling dust, an iron rod that seemed to be more than a meter long chopped down on the head of the weak, helpless, and pitiful Miss Huai Ji. It was the 10 hands with sharp edges and corners. Although the length was exaggerated compared to the ordinary 10 hands, with the height and size of the person who came, it didn't make people feel any sense of disharmony. It didn't matter if it was called an iron ruler or a Ryukyu trident. In any case, any kind of weapon in the hands of such a giant would become an out-and-out murder weapon. It was clearly a weapon used to catch criminals and avoid harming their lives, but when he made a move, he mercilessly aimed at a fatal position. In the loud roar, Huai Shi sighed and raised his eyes. He looked down at the cup and toothbrush in his hand, took a step to the right, and barely avoided the 10 hands that could split steel. Then, he took a step forward. He raised the cup and splashed the mouthwash on the face of the person who came. It didn't look like he had a girlfriend. Huai Shi was merciful and used the mouthwash of a beautiful girl to wash his face. In a hurry, the giant man dressed as a monk suddenly lowered his head, and his bamboo hat blocked all the splashing water. But before he could raise his face, then, he saw a toothbrush with toothpaste foam poking straight at his eyeball. It was as fast as lightning. In the shrill howl, it was already close. In the end, it stopped abruptly. Hovering in front of the newcomer's eyes, Huaishi's little finger flicked the toothbrush handle slightly, splashing some toothpaste foam into the newcomer's eyes. "Wash your eyes, friend." Huaishi retracted his arm, tilted his head back, and poured the last bit of water into his throat. Then, he began to rinse his mouth. The giant monk roared furiously. His face was ashen. In a literal sense, it was ashen. Soon, his entire body seemed to have turned indigo in his fury. He looked like a guardian in a temple. His hair and beard all stood up, and his pocket exploded. His short red hair spread out like fire. The sacred mark of the Ingzhou genealogy, mistress of the Green Quarter. How dare you resist arrest? Then, there's no need to be merciful. The owner of the Bluestone district roared. Huaishi was dumbfounded. She almost spat out the mouthful of water in her mouth. He had never seen such a unique train of thought. It's fine if you insist on resisting arrest, but who was the one who showed mercy? Could this be some kind of traditional Ingzhou art monologue? It was called Luoyu, right? But then, there was a strange sound in the air. An invisible force twisted and formed a thick rope. It instantly contracted inward, binding Huaishi within. Outside the door, the skinny ascendant raised her eyes. She raised her hand and pulled on the origin substance rope. Then, a blinding electric current shot up from the rope, flowing into Huaishi's body. Numb. Remember, I am the director of the Looming Hall. Mitajima Tadako, the owner of the Bluestone district, raised her hands with a sinister smile. Her 10 hands clenched, and a dark green all suddenly popped out of the heavy end. In midair, her arms suddenly expanded by another 30%. A terrifying force erupted, breaking through the limit, and smashing down on the skull of Huaishi Suko. Secret instrument Jingang force. At that moment, Huaishi lowered his eyes and sighed helplessly. What? Jiaoshan turned around in shock, glaring at his colleague behind him. The people of the Looming Hall went over? Went. Just now, Mao Yi replied. As the 8 Hound warriors, you let them do as they please. Jiaoshan was furious. This is the Rigian family. Where do you place the name and dignity of the Rigian family? The Rigian family. What Rigian family? Right now, it's just meat on the plates of ministers and warriors. Mao Yi sneered. Don't you understand, Jiaoshan? This so-called trial of the imperial chef and demon is just treating us like food. At this time, does anyone still care about the name of the 8 Hound warriors? He glanced at the ashen-faced Jiaoshan, shaking his head and sighing. You're just a dog left and right. The employer has changed. Learn to read the atmosphere early, Lord Jiaoshan. Jiaoshan's face was ashen, the veins on his hand protruding from the hilt of his sword. The so-called warriors are the oxen and horses under the Lord. Mao Yi, haven't you thought about why your new employer would like a dog that betrays its master? Get out of my way. Jiaoshan glanced at him indifferently for the last time. Jiaoshan knocked away Mao Yi, who was blocking his way, and rushed to the courtyard where Huaiji was. It's too late. They've already left. Mao Yi shook his head mockingly. But that Miss Huaiji is really a beauty. It's understandable that Jiaoshan minister is so worried. Jiaoshan's footsteps paused. He looked over with a gloomy gaze with a trace of pity. It was as if he was looking at an idiot. You still haven't figured out who you should be worried about? Are you worried about that unfathomable demon from the abyss, or the other dogs of your new master? Being looked at like that, Mao Yi fell into a daze. Suddenly, he felt a trace of uneasiness. Just like what Mao Yi had said. When they arrived, it was already too late. The entire courtyard was a mess. Zhenxi, who had finally returned to sleep, was sitting on a chair and drinking tea to calm herself down. There were continuous loud noises coming from the house behind her. Are you okay, Zhenxi? Jiaoshan bent down and held her shoulder. After looking at her for a moment, he finally heaved a sigh of relief. Mao Yi was already impatient. Where's Huaiji? Where's Huaiji? Zhen she raised her hand with a complicated expression and pointed inside the house. The dull loud noises were getting clearer and clearer. Jiao Shan and Mao Yi looked at each other. Their expressions were getting more and more complicated. When they walked in, they heard more and more miserable screams. "Don't hit me. I'm wrong. I admit it. Don't hit me." A burly man as big as a mountain was lying on the ground, kowtowing loudly. He screamed and cried, "Please let me go, Miss Huaiji. I don't know anything." Behind him, a half-dead and skinny sublimator was hanging on the beam. He was foaming at the mouth and had already lost consciousness. "Did I ask you to stop? Continue." Motoko Huaiji flew up and kicked his head. She scolded, "Do you know why you're an idiot? It's because you usually slack off in the temple and don't kowtow. Now you're making up for it. You can't miss a day or a day's worth. This is what happens when you slack off." Then, Mao Yi saw that the elite of the Middle Prefectural Office, the tough man known as the Ironworks Master, actually continued to kowtow without even frowning. Even after smashing through the floor and smashing his head in front of the broken steel bars and stones, he didn't dare to stop. Silence. In the dead silence, there was only the sound of continuous kowtowing. In the midst of the loud noise, Huaishir turned around and smiled at Jiaoshan. "You guys came at the right time. The real murderer who killed Riken Nobuyuki has been found. His Weibo name is Dai Dai Xiao. Cough cough. Anyway, hurry up and take him down." As he spoke, he even kicked the master of the Ironworks Master beside him. "Who's the wrong murderer?" "It's me. It's me!" Mitsushima Tadago cried and kowtowed. "Hurry up and take me away. I admit to my crimes. I'm the one who did it." The awkward silence came again. Jiaoshan and Mao Yi were stunned. Jiaoshan had never seen such a fantastical scene and didn't know what was going on. After seeing such a fantastical scene, Mao Yi had already begun to imagine what kind of tricks his new employer would play on him as the one who caused all this. At this point, there was only one way left. Mao Yi instinctively drew his sword. His face was ferocious. "You bam!" A punch came from behind and hit the back of his head. Mao Yi fainted on the spot. He didn't know if it was an accident or intentional, but that punch did make Huaishir's eyes light up. The timing and strength were just right. It was between a fatal blow and Mao Ye's tolerance limit. "I'm sorry. Although this guy is embarrassing, he's still a retainer of the Riken family. I hope you can forgive him for being rude." Jiaoshan retracted his fist and raised his hand to grab Mao Yi by the collar and threw him out of the door. "Thinking about it carefully, you guys seem to have been rude from the beginning. Don't you want to consider committing seppuku?" Huaishir pinched his chin and pondered for a moment. He suddenly remembered. "I'm sorry. Although it's rare for a guest to come, it's a bit messy here. I haven't cleaned it up yet. Please wait for me at the door. I'll make tea for you." "There's no need for tea." Jiaoshan glanced indifferently at the two guys at Huaishir's feet. "However, I'm more concerned about what you've done." "I've done what a kind person should do." Huaishir shrugged. His 5 fingers opened, and wisps of ashes fell from his fingertips. "You see, sometimes, to make people recognize reality, it only needs a nightmare." Jiaoshan didn't speak. His brows gradually furrowed. He didn't know what to do. Should he take down this arrogant person on the spot, or pretend that nothing happened? But no matter what, the looming hall would not let this go. Just as he was pondering, the phone in his arms suddenly rang. After connecting, his expression changed slightly. Soon, he hung up the phone. "Miss Huaishir, Master Quan Jiang wants to see you." Chapter 663. Invite what? Invite me to dinner or tea? Hearing his words, Huaishir remained unmoved. Instead, she sat back down on the chair in the room and calmly asked, "Don't tell me that when the time comes, the old man will suddenly throw his cup as a signal, and the Hakihunian warriors of your family will rush out from behind the screen and chop me into pieces?" You are Ms. Shin's representative, and also an honored guest of Rikyo House. This kind of humiliation will never happen again in Rikyo House. Kakuyama replied calmly. We just want to conduct a temporary investigation to clear your suspicion. Ms. Amber has arrived, please don't worry. What about Shin? Huaishur asked. If I leave, will anyone use her as an excuse? Before you return, this one will not leave this place. Kakuyama replied firmly. If anything happens to Ms. Shin, you can cut off my head, and I will not have any objections. Just outside the door, a car had quietly stopped. The car door opened, waiting for Ms. Huaishur's arrival. After confirming with Shin that Kakuyama could be trusted, Huaishur handed the Lord of the Flies to her in front of Kakuyama and gave Kakuyama one last look. That kind of look made Kakuyama's back a little cold. He didn't know if it was a threat or a taunt. But when Kakuyama came back to his senses, that graceful figure was already gone. Huaishur sat in the car and finally came back to his senses. Thinking of his swaying steps just now, he couldn't help but sigh. I'm so flirtatious. Name? Huaishur Suko. Age? 18. Gender? Male. Huaishur rolled her eyes, causing the faces of the old men at the head of the table to darken. Ms. Huaishur, this was suggested by Inugon family's elder to hold a temporary investigation for you. I hope you can be more serious and not joke around. It's strange, I think you already have the answers to some of the questions, right? Just like my gender. You can't change the answers just because you found a nail in a soft persimmon, right? Today's Hui poems were still as eccentric as ever. Until Hu Po, who was watching coldly from the side, was about to poke a few holes in himself with his gaze. All right. If you have any questions, please ask quickly. Huaishur lowered his eyes and glanced at the clock on his phone. After all, time is precious. Then, let's get straight to the point. In the middle of the seat of honor, the middle-aged man next to old Hounjiang said, Where were you last night? When he asked the question, his eyes were as sharp as a razor, cutting fine cuts on a person's skin. Sleep, Huaishur replied calmly. I was drunk last night and everyone saw it. A bartender did it, and I didn't open my eyes until 10 o'clock this morning. The middle-aged man suddenly asked, Who can prove that you have been in the room all this time? Who can prove that I wasn't in the room the whole time? Huaishur sneered. I thought that you would understand some common sense, but I still say it anyway. This kind of thing is just like on the internet, whoever has the loudest voice is right. I don't study much, but I remember that all the borders of this country and your country use maritime law, right? However, no matter which law system it is, there is the most basic principle. People can't incriminate themselves. Who makes the claim and who provides evidence is the principle of heaven and earth. Do you want me to teach you this? I used to be a class representative in the Ivory Towers border law class. Not only was he a class representative, but with Huaishur's level, the law professor had already begun to occasionally ask Huaishur to teach the class when he wanted to slack off. Occasionally, when Huaishur wanted to slack off, he would also give classical music appreciation to him. Speaking of which, that professor's music appreciation level was really good, and he had a different understanding of classical music, especially Mozart. In fact, everyone in the law class liked Mozart. Maybe everyone felt that when they repeatedly jumped on the edge of the law, listening to Mozart would give them a strange sense of beauty. Now it seemed that the deterrent effect of the border law class was outstanding. Anyway, as soon as Huaishur said that, the middle-aged man's face immediately became ugly. The Ivory Towers border law class was famous for being difficult and troublesome. Every year, there were all kinds of talents who were about to graduate in order to get higher evaluation points from the teacher. They tirelessly wandered between the borders and did something that was not allowed in the law. This was a warning. If Lamia Hall tried to use this aggressive method again, Huaishur had the right to hire a graduate as a lawyer to defend the poor and helpless Miss Motoko. When the atmosphere gradually fell into a stalemate, the silent Inu Jiang suddenly coughed twice. As the one who played the role of a good policeman, he finally said, Mr. Yamanaka lost his words for a moment. Please don't be offended. He was just too anxious. Because Miss Motoko's habit is too similar to that of a murderer. Therefore, no, this is not the same, right? Miss Motoko suddenly made a sound and interrupted him. She spread her hands and told him seriously, this is obviously not the same thing. Inu Jiang was stunned for a moment and immediately nodded. I'd like to hear the details. I cough. A friend once told me that beheading is different from correcting a mistake. Huai Shi raised a finger and said seriously, it's not just whether there is a complete cut or not, whether there is a connection left. Even the method and thinking are completely different. In your eyes, is there only one way to chop off the neck in the world? Even if you say so, Yamanaka was about to speak, but he was interrupted again. Listen, what I want to tell you is that there is a decisive difference between beheading and correcting a mistake. Huai Shi said coldly, the so-called beheading is a very straightforward and very comfortable method. It won't be sticky and confusing. Do you understand that when it's time to make a decision, it's time to make a decision? This is the simplest and most straightforward way to end it. Its purpose is to kill something, to make something disappear, to let something leave the world, to avoid endless poison. You just need to find the right place, then cut, and everything will be over. Other than that, anything else is superfluous. So you need to be more cautious, examine your own purpose, examine your own deviation and thoughts. If there is a second solution, you should not use it. Because a person only has one life, and there is no possibility of redeeming it. What the F***ck are you talking about? Yamanaka wanted to refute her like this, but when she said these words, her expression became solemn and serious, as if she was narrating some irrefutable truth. She did not allow others to interrupt her. But the guy who corrects a mistake is different. Huai Shi squinted and suddenly said, if I didn't see wrongly at the scene, some people had been tortured before they died, right? Once again, he recalled the corpse he saw in the alley. The tragic ravages that happened before the beheading. That guy's focus was not on the beheading, but what happened before the beheading. The deceased experienced pain, and the final mistake was just a pity for you. From the beginning, it was contrary to the basic idea of beheading. Yamanaka was furious and stared at him. Do you think this kind of sophistry will work? I'm just saying some of my own thoughts. Isn't this what you asked me? Huai Shi shrugged and helplessly spread his hands. But when he looked at the faces of those people, he couldn't help but smile. To be honest, I don't know why he specifically used this way of killing, but I think he wants you to pay the price. Could it be that, among you guys, have you done something that you feel guilty about? In the silence, no one spoke. Only Yamanaka's face became more and more ugly. Inu Jiang was still silent, as if he didn't hear. Bingo. Huai Shi seemed to hear a hallucinatory prompt. It didn't take long for the short interrogation meeting to finally end. It didn't succeed in clearing the suspicion. Anyway, even if Looming Hall said that they believed that Huai Shi wouldn't be the wrong murderer, Huai Shi probably wouldn't believe them. The final decision was that although there was suspicion, it wasn't big. During the investigation, they couldn't leave the range of Rigi's house, and they couldn't go out, which was equivalent to a different kind of grounding. Maybe it was because he went out occasionally to kill before, and it left some shadow in the hearts of the old men of Looming Hall. Huai Shi didn't care about personal freedom. Anyway, he was hired to cook. After the trial of the culinary demon was over, and Maki's matter was settled, he would leave. Would Looming Hall dare to stop him? After sending him out, Hupo felt that he was about to be mentally and physically exhausted. It's just a formality. Why do you keep looking for trouble? If I can handle it, I'll directly take her away. If I can't, then I'll just go through the motions. Why do all the good and bad things have been said by Looming Hall? Huaishe sneered, not buying the pretense of those old men at all. It's best to be careful. Those old men might be planning how to deal with you after the competition. Hu Pu shook his head. What level do you think those ascenders of Looming Hall are at? They're average. They can barely maintain law and order. But when it comes to using them for something, they're so stingy that they can't do anything. Huaishe evaluated. If you really want to rely on those people to catch the wrong murderer, then it's better to hope that they can die in a place where they won't cause trouble for others. That's normal. The left, right, and center offices are just organizations that Looming Hall uses to cooperate with the MPD to maintain social order. The truly capable people have long been chosen to enter the departments of fire control and thief control, not to mention the throne that belongs to the emperor in name. After Hu Pu casually warned him, he asked, "It sounds like you have some sort of idea just now? Maybe I'm just gauging the heart of a gentleman with the yardstick of a villain. I'm just using my shallow criminal experience to do some reverse analysis." Huaishe thought for a long time and said seriously, "I think there's a problem with your family." Chapter 664. I think there's something wrong with your family. After hearing this, Ricky Amber felt that the world had become even more fantastical. She looked at Huaishe strangely. How can you think that there's nothing wrong with our family? Anyone with eyes should know that there's something wrong, right? Huaishe was a little stunned and immediately embarrassed. My family used to be like this. I thought it was quite normal. Amber rolled his eyes when he saw this. As long as there are too many people, there will be problems everywhere. Once there's too much money, there will be problems even if there's nothing wrong. It's not strange that there's something wrong with the Ricky family, but it's strange that there's nothing wrong with them. No, I'm just sure of one thing. Huaishe sighed softly. These days, I've been thinking about why Sasaki didn't want to show up, but insisted on secretly tracking the clues of the murderer. Is there a possibility that he realized that the Ricky family can't be trusted anymore? After a pause, his expression became gloomy. That is to say, if the situation is worse, the murderer may be hiding in the Ricky family now, right? Amber didn't say anything, so she just shrugged. Who do you think it could be? Huaishe stared at her, and she also looked at Huaishe without saying anything. Huaishe also didn't say anything, but looked straight at her, as if he was going to force her to say something with his telekinesis. Huaishe, I didn't invite you to be a detective. Isn't it normal for a tool to have multiple jobs? Huaishe smoked and squinted at her. Besides, didn't you tell me about this in the first place? Why are all of you Ricky family members the same, saying one thing after another, one thing after the other? No matter what you say, you're always right, huh? It's different now, Amber answered expressionlessly. If you were just a tool, I would have pushed you into the mud pit and used you until you got back 70 million yuan. But Zhenshi is different, she has nothing to do with these scandals. Huaishe was speechless. You're really planning for Zhenshi? What else? If given the chance, who wouldn't want to be a good person? Hu Pu shook his head. The only difference is who can be the bad guy when something happens. Huaishe sighed. To be honest, everyone looks like a murderer to me now, including you. What about Maki? Amber asked. Forget it. Huaishe shook his head. She was the first person I checked, but she couldn't even hold a kitchen knife. With her weight and strength, she couldn't even cut a chicken's neck, let alone a human neck. Don't make things difficult for her. It might not be impossible, right? Hu Pu asked. It's not that it's not certain. It's absolutely impossible. Huaishe answered her flatly. With her physical strength and condition, there is only one person in the world who can do such a thing. We all know that person, don't we? The corners of Hu Pu's eyes twitched violently. He didn't say anything. Who else could it be? Luo Xian. If it was Sister Xian, she might be able to kill her way from Nara to Kyoto with a small piece of paper in her hand. But if it was really her, she didn't need to hide at all. She could kill everyone in the Riken family with a kitchen knife. Maybe there was a second person in the world who had such a talent, but it definitely couldn't be Maki. The probability of this was even more exaggerated than Huai Shi going out to buy a pack of cigarettes and running into 8 destructive elements. You really trust her? Trust is mutual, Hu Po. Huai Shi looked over and stared into Hu Po's eyes. So, answer me, are you a murderer? Hu Po was amused and suddenly asked, Huai Shi, do you hate your family? It depends. Huai Shi said, although I want to beat them up sometimes, it's not like I hate them to the point of being irreconcilable. If we can't live together, we can live separately. Isn't it the same? That's great, Huai Shi. I want to be like you, but unfortunately, I can't be so forgiving. Amber pinched out his cigarette and stamped it out. He looked around calmly. There were many times when I really wanted to kill those idiots who made a fool of themselves, but unfortunately, in this world, there's no end to those stupid teammates who drag others down. What's even more regrettable is that I can't do that. The murderer can be anyone here, but it can't be me. His expression was full of regret, as well as envy that could not be faked. Huai Shi sighed. If you have any deep hatred for this place, you can just say it. Take out some evidence of those guys doing shameful things, pull in the Dongxia family, and we'll team up to do a dungeon. I'll kill them from the front door to the back door with you. Isn't that easier than competing with others in cooking? In that case, the Riken family won't exist at all, right? Hu Po shook his head. It takes many years to build a family and many people's efforts, but it only takes an instant to destroy a family. I didn't come back to destroy all of this, and I didn't hire you because you're good at chopping off people's heads. Don't be mistaken. It sounds like you have great expectations for me. That's right, Your Highness. Hu Po looked at him one last time and said seriously, just focus on being a chef. This is a very promising job. You don't have to worry about anything else. Hu Po waved his hand and turned to leave. In the end, she didn't tell Huai Shi about her suspicions. She was fooled. However, Huai Shi's impression of Zhen she had changed quite a bit after seeing her care and concern. Even if to her, it was just a little bit of extra space that slipped through her fingers. He casually put the lighter in his hand into his pocket. He turned around and walked out of the door. He saw the girl who had been waiting for a long time under the sun. She was happily waving at Miss Huai Shi. Zhen. Miss Huai Shi, you've worked hard. They didn't make things difficult for you, right? With the excuse of caring, Zhen grabbed Miss Huai Shi's little hand and carefully rubbed it. I was so worried about you. It's good that you're fine. No matter how you look at it, it's more like you're lusting after my body. Huai Shi began to have a headache. He secretly and forcefully pulled his hand out of her grasp. Then he raised his hand and pressed it against her forehead, blocking Zhen who was about to pounce on him. He kept a safe distance. He didn't have such a thing as a chest. What if he touched something indescribable and terrifying? It's just a little while. You don't have to be so anxious, right? Because I'm worried. Zhen tried to move forward while resisting her hand. She accidentally said what she was thinking. Uncle Jiaoshan said that those old men aren't good people. I think they're just lusting after Miss Huai Shi's beauty. Wasn't that the plot in the little booklet in the convenience store? Once their weakness was caught, they would be forced to do this and that by those perverted old men. Thinking of this, Zhen wanted to bite her handkerchief. Her heart felt like it was being stabbed by a knife. She didn't know if she was envious or angry. Can you be serious for a moment? Huai Shi curled her fingers and mercilessly knocked her on the head. She curled her lips and said, everyone had a friendly discussion, cleared up the rumors, cleared up the misunderstanding, and reserved their opinions. The meeting ended in a harmonious atmosphere. Ah, such a bureaucratic tone. Anyway, it's just some meaningless pretense. Don't worry about it. Huai Shi said, instead of worrying about this, you should worry about where to sleep at night. The house has been destroyed. What should we do? Don't worry about that. Zhen Shi became excited again. Uncle Jiaoshan gave us a big house. Even the kitchen is much more spacious than before. There's even a private hot spring in the back. It's said that it's good for the skin. Let's go to the hot spring together after we go back. Hot spring? Forget it. I'm not interested in hot water. Hey, let's go together. Let's go together. Zhen Shi wagged her little invisible tail and ran back and forth around Miss Huaishe. Her eyes were full of hope. Miss Huaishe's skin is so good. Let me soak in it and let me bask in it. Huaishe could only look up at the sky and sigh. It's not a matter of basking in the light or not. It's a matter of whether some of your thoughts can be seen in the light or not. No. He refused decisively. I'm tired. Let's go home and sleep. Okay, Zhen Shi followed beside him dejectedly. Her dejected look made Huaishe feel like she had done something unforgivable. He sighed and couldn't help but shake his head. Zhen Shi, you're going to run for the head of the family. Don't always act like a child. It's just going through the motions anyway. Zhen Shi shook her head nonchalantly. Being the head of the family is something that cousin Hu Po and cousin Jiu Jing should worry about. Just the thought of having to deal with those old fogies every day makes me feel terrible. It's too scary. When you first decided to run for the head of the family, you still acted like you were very powerful. Huaishe sighed. I think that if you're serious, you'll be able to get the hang of it very quickly. This is different. Although I've had that kind of dream before, it feels completely different from what I imagined. Zhen Shi looked away and muttered in a low voice. Anyway, if I had to stay in a place like this for the rest of my life, I definitely wouldn't be able to bear it. Even if I had a very comfortable bed and could earn a lot of money, it would still be very sad. Anyway, I'm very old-fashioned. The life in the television doesn't suit me. When she said this, it made people feel like she was a country bumpkin who had nothing to lose. Huaishe didn't know whether to sympathize or be surprised. He was just a little worried. Zhen Shi, are you okay? I'm sorry. It's just that when I think about Miss Huaizhi leaving after the competition, I feel a little sad. Zhen Shi lowered her head and pulled Huaishe's sleeve, looking pitiful. No matter how powerful I looked before, I was just a fox pretending to be a tiger. Once Miss Huaizhi is gone, I'll definitely be beaten back to square one. Can't I stay for a while longer? Sorry, I'm afraid that's very difficult. After all, there's still a lot of work to do. Huaishe replied helplessly, Don't be sad. Even if I'm not here, Hu Po will definitely take care of you. But that's different from Miss Huaizhi. Zhen Shi shook her head. I know that my cousin Hu Po definitely won't care, but I don't want to live under someone else's roof. Since I was young, my mother has always said that if you don't work, you won't eat. If I want to truly live a peaceful life, I really have to find a stable job, right? You've already thought about it? Yes. She thought for a moment and said firmly, Although it's not a dream or anything, I already have something I want to do in the future. The girl's expression was rarely serious. She was so serious and solemn, as if she was afraid that Miss Huaizhi wouldn't agree. She was waiting for his approval. Huaishe was stunned for a long time. He couldn't help but reach out and ruffle her hair. It's a good thing to have a goal, but can you tell me the specifics? This is a secret. I feel like it'll be funny if I tell you. Zhen Shi avoided his gaze and said embarrassedly, When the day comes that I can do it, I'll tell Miss Huaizhi. Huaishe laughed. Then you'll have to do your best. Yes. Zhen Shi nodded vigorously and also laughed, suggesting, Miss Huaizhi, I'll cook porridge tonight. We can also fry some spring fish. Okay. After eating, let's go to the hot spring together. No. Let's go. No, I have rabies. I'm afraid of water. Sauna is fine too. I'm afraid of heat. No. As they chatted, they slowly made their way back to where they were supposed to go. When Zhen Shi raised her head, she could see Miss Huiji's back in front of her. Her slender figure was bathed in the afternoon sun, as if the sun was gradually overlapping. It was sparkling. Just looking at it was enough to make people feel at ease. Even if they walked into the darkness, they could feel the warmth that made people yearn for moving on the earth. As long as they saw it once, they wouldn't despair in anxiety and hesitation. No matter how long the dark valley was, that was the most precious thing in the world. Compared to it, the position of the head of the family and the beautiful life on TV were not even worth mentioning. "I want to be like Miss Huijin," she whispered softly. She buried this wish deep in her heart, which she would never tell her, and stepped forward to catch up. Chapter 665. In another quiet room, the young warrior respectfully took 3 steps back on his knees, bowed his head again, and said goodbye to the old man of the looming hall. "Then, I'll have to trouble you to take care of me." "You're welcome, we're all part of the government, it's only right to take care of each other. Mr. Jujing is so young, the future matters will depend on you." The old minister also responded with a smile on his face, without any mistakes or omissions, and the arrogance of the people of the capital could not be seen. Only after he saw Jujing leave, did the smile on his face gradually fade. "He's a good young man, isn't he?" he said to himself. In the shadow behind him, a blurry outline appeared, responding to the Lord's words, "In my opinion, he is indeed dignified. But his eyes are like a fox's." Recalling that pair of slender eyes, the old minister lowered his eyes and frowned. This did not mean that he was as cunning as a fox or so charming. It was just that he had an uneasy prejudice. No matter how upright and solemn he looked, he always felt that pair of eyes always had an indescribable evil aura, like a crack that led to the darkness. But in the end, the saying that you can judge people by their eyes and faces is unreliable. This is nothing more than my own conjecture. It would be a joke to reject such a talent because of this. He paused for a moment, then suddenly said in a loud voice, "Watch him." The servant in the shadow nodded in response. Warriors were lackeys. Just like what Jiaoshan once said, no matter how dignified it was, the mission of a warrior was to walk for the Lord. Whether it was fighting on the battlefield or cutting off future troubles, it was their duty. This was the essence that could not be covered up by the Yi Yin's tale and the Book of 5 Wheels. After the layers of halo and the so-called morality were stripped away, only the part that belonged to the heart stick could represent itself. Thugs, bodyguards, soldiers. To the government they were just dogs. However, there were many types of dogs. Loyal dogs, fierce dogs, crazy dogs, useless dogs, dogs that betrayed their owners. There were also dogs like Quan Jiang, who was a loathsome guard dog. While pondering, her husband suddenly raised his head and ordered the servant outside the house. Later, "Take my nameplate and go to see Inu Jiang Zongun. Tell him that I have long admired the Rigian clan. I have heard that the Rigian clan has hidden a secret treasure of the Yatsufusa. I want to see it." "Yes." The servant outside the room turned around and ran away. In the silence, no one spoke. The car door opened, and Hu Pasog shook's old face with a strange smile. Holding his little teapot, he clicked his tongue and sighed. "It's good to be young. It reminds me of when I was young." Sure enough, you should find a partner when you're young. It doesn't matter if it's a man or a woman, as long as you're happy. Hupa felt helpless once again. He had no choice. He really couldn't deal with this old bastard. So, just like how the Egyptian genealogy produced orthopedics, the Roman genealogy produced perverts, and the Russian Federation genealogy loved little boys. Could it be that the Dongxia genealogy produced this kind of headache-inducing old monster? She thought about Lu Wu, Mystic Bird, Judas, and Emperor Qing, Hu Po's head began to hurt. "Whatever you say." She leaned against the car seat and sighed heavily. "Don't be so lethargic. When you're young, you should go out more often and get some sun. Once you're old, you won't want to move anymore. You'll just sit in your little room day after day. The only thing you can talk about is cooking. Gwashuk sipped the tea from the teapot that seemed to never be finished. He looked at her disheveled appearance and gloated, "You seem to be very annoyed by your work." Hoopa shrugged. "Who says I'm not? There are so many things to do, and I'm afraid of breaking the vases. In the end, it's a mess." Gwashuk shook his head. "I'm talking about Hoopa. It's Hoopa." The girl raised her voice. "I'm Juzi, little flower. Can you please respect the traditions of Ingzhou and not call me like a northeastern child?" The old man curled his lips. "It's just a title. With your age, even my granddaughter looks old. Isn't it the same if you call me Hoopa or Nanan?" He paused for a moment and asked, "You're talking about that Jiechwei murderous demon. Is he strong?" Hoopa wanted to say something but hesitated. She sighed helplessly. "It's not a matter of whether he's strong or not. He's very troublesome." "How troublesome?" "No matter who the other party is, right now, this is clearly a method used to stir up trouble and interrupt the Rygian family's master selection. Before the culinary demon trial is over, who knows what kind of trouble will be caused. What's more, that idiot Rygian Bujing died in that kind of place, giving the looming hall the best excuse. They can't wait for the Rygian family to admit that the situation is out of control and then fully take over. That old man Inu Jiang brought out the old rules and held some culinary demon trial. It's a hindrance to them." Hoopa rubbed her brows and sighed regretfully. "I'm afraid this is just a prelude. Soon, the current Rygian family will gradually become a battlefield between the Gong family and the Wu family." She could foresee that day was very close. At that time, Nara would definitely become a huge whirlpool. "That's why I envy you young people." Gwashuk laughed ambiguously and asked again, "Under such circumstances, how long do you think the Imperial Culinary Demon trial will last?" Hoopa thought for a moment and replied, "It's half over now, but they should be more cautious later. If they want to really get to the bottom of it, it'll take at least a month, right?" "A month? Then wouldn't the kimchi I pickled before I left be spoiled?" Gwashuk frowned in shock. "That's why you should stop thinking about your kimchi at a time like this, okay? Besides, it's only a month. It's fine to just leave the kimchi there." "Other kimchi are fine, but mine isn't. The culinary demon's blood also has a shelf life. If I wait until next month, where am I going to find so much culinary demon's blood to exchange for water?" Hoopa rolled her eyes and was speechless. "That's why I say it's good to be young. Everything can be done slowly." Gwashuk sighed and said sincerely, "When people get old, they will know that time is precious. They won't be willing to waste too much time on meaningless things. What's precious is not patience, but decisiveness. Only people who don't have much time left will understand how precious time and efficiency are." He put down the teapot and suddenly said, "Little Hu, about that naming duel, help me arrange it." Hoopa sighed helplessly. She didn't have the energy to fix it anymore. She only asked, "Who do you want to name? Do you have a list?" Hoopa took out a few books from the bag behind the car seat. He looked through them casually and handed over a document. Gwashuk took it and flipped it open. Including the introduction, it was only 2 simple pages. The old man took out a page and pointed at the name at the very front. "This?" Hoopa glanced at it. "The general of the Undermountain cuisine? This guy is very weak. Are you planning to bully him?" "No, I mean other than this." Gwashuk picked up the list seriously and pointed it at Hoopa's face. He said seriously, "Other than this guy who can't even be brought to the table, name everyone else." 7, all of them? "All of them," Gwashuk said calmly. "They're all just a bunch of people who want to fish in troubled waters. Instead of letting them waste this old man's time, why don't I just get rid of them?" Hoopa was stunned. But this is, too what? Exaggerated? I don't think so." The corners of Gwashuk's mouth slowly curled up. His wrinkled face revealed a smile unique to a predator. There are only 7 dishes of this level. Do you think this old man can't finish them all? In the silence, a malevolent malice that came from the abyss appeared in those pitch-black eyes. There's a method called cutting the Gordian knot. No matter what they do, as long as the competition is over, the result will be unshakable. Since you know it's going to rain soon, shouldn't the most important thing be to put away the clothes first? He was smiling, full of anticipation. After he shed his usual disguise of being old and kind, what was revealed was the madness and malevolence that was brewed from countless demonic culinary skills. He had once gone deep into paradise and didn't become a dish on a plate. Instead, he was a terrifying existence that escaped unscathed from the rancher. There's no need to be so serious, right? Hoopa was stunned. This is professionalism, little Hoo. He said matter-of-factly, aren't I here to cook? Before they mess up my competition, why don't you let me have some fun first? When this abnormal sense of hunger could no longer be concealed, the biggest monster in this trial of the Imperial Culinary Demon issued a challenge to all the opponents. 1 against 7? In the evening, Huai Shi, who received the news, didn't feel good. Is it that exaggerated? Yes, it's that exaggerated. Hoopa said tiredly on the phone. The old man was impatient. He wanted to have some fun before someone decided to flip the table. In the end, he moved his mouth and I ran my legs. Isn't the position of the agent and the employer reversed? Do you need to change the agent? I want to recommend a famous idle culinary demon, Mr. Huai Shi. He's good, doesn't stick to people, does things for money, and absolutely won't cause any trouble. Okay, you go and fight with him? Whoever wins gets the job. Forget it. The corner of Huai Shi's eyes twitched. Even if he had seen an overly powerful opponent like Eliza, Huai Shi still couldn't see through old Gua's depth. That old guy hadn't used his real strength since the beginning of the competition. He could be said to be unfathomable. At this time, he was still glad that he hadn't been selected. How could he be so reckless as to deliver food to the door? Miss Huai Shi was very gentlemanly. Jumping into a frying pan or something, forget it. So, 1 against 7, things like taking turns to fight. You really settled it? After all, the employers are some small characters who can only muddy the water if they stay. It's not difficult to get something on them or give them a reward that they can't refuse. It's just that my legs hurt from running. Huai Shi thought for a long time and said seriously, Hoopa, I sell my body, not my skills. Forget about massaging my legs. Bang. The sound of the phone being squeezed came from the other end. Do I care? I'm afraid you'll think too much. Misunderstandings have to be explained clearly, right? Huai Shi casually said, then, what's the specific time? What time? Tonight. Before Hoopa hung up the phone, he told him, in an hour. Chapter 666. Although it was said to be an hour, they had actually waited for 2 to 3 hours. It was obvious that some people were not happy to see the chef's demon trial speeding up, and were secretly trying to stop them. However, in the end, no one was able to openly violate the rules of the chef's demon trial. After Song Jiang nodded his head, the challenge was quickly approved. In order to protect the Rigian family's property and reputation, this samurai, who had been mocked as an old dog, had put in a lot of effort these days. When he met Guashuk's arrogant challenge, it was like meeting a pillow when he was sleepy. Among everyone, he was probably the one who wanted the chef's demon trial to end as soon as possible. Even if the Gong clan and Wu clan wouldn't give him a good ending after this matter was over, it wouldn't be long before they would casually find a reason to send him a piece of paper, a piece of white cloth, and a rib. They would urge him to be on his way as soon as possible. Song Jiang did not care about this at all. Whether it was blind loyalty or stubbornness, that old man had already bet his life on the responsibility that the Rigian family had entrusted to him. The cruelest thing in the world was death. If a person was not afraid of death, then what difference did it make to him, no matter how strong the opponent was? 2 hours later, the 8 enforcers of the Rygian family finally gave their permission. Huai Shi had seen enough of the commotion, and finally brought Zhen Shi to watch. As soon as they entered, they saw the tattooed Russian Federation's fur bear, Vladimir, waving at them enthusiastically, "Over here, over here. He bootlicker." Huai Shi glanced at him and pretended not to see him. He continued to maintain the image of Miss Huai Ji as a noble and cold goddess. Vladimir still looked like a wild punk. After grinning at Zhen Shi, he withdrew his gaze. After Huai Shi sat down, he realized there were indeed a lot of people here today. Not only were the representatives of the candidates present, even the chef's demon chefs who had already been eliminated were here. For example, the head chef of the Three Roads, Shen Jinji, industrial chef Zhijian, and so on. Even the eliminated candidates were not willing to miss this feast. After all, it was Guashuk, an undying old monster. However, he hadn't appeared in a public competition for more than 20 years. Only the cooking demons who had heard about him from their teachers and rumors couldn't come to a conclusion. 1 against 7, could such an exaggerated thing really be done? No matter how watery a cooking demon was, he was still a cooking demon. They were elites and experts that were 1 in a million. If the one-on-one duels were divided into 7 days, perhaps the old man would be able to defeat all of his opponents easily. However, fighting against 7 genuine cooking demons in a row, this kind of ridiculous matter was simply unimaginable. Even if he was known as the Taotai, his appetite shouldn't be so exaggerated, right? "Oh ho, everyone is here? Sorry to keep you waiting." Just as everyone was waiting, the kind and warm voice that sounded like an old man walking his bird in the park sounded from the entrance. He was carrying a bamboo basket in one hand and a heavy cloth package in the other. No one knew what was inside. Casually strolling past, he greeted each of his peers in a friendly manner. And the bloody package in his hand looked like a pig head? Huai Shi raised his brows. For some reason, he felt very familiar with the shape of the heads of various creatures. Could it be that he had gained a passive ability after chopping off too many heads? Oh my, did she see through it? Guashuk chuckled. Miss Huai Shi has great taste. It's the only one with 7 tastes. He casually walked to the side of his counter, put down his things, and opened the package. Inside the package was a pig head that had just been bled out. It had yet to be singed or treated. It wasn't easy to find this thing. I've traveled all over Nara, and it took me 2 hours to find a pig farm. You people from Yingzhou are so troublesome, you can't even raise your pigs properly. He casually pulled the pig head's ears and mouth. He then placed his elbow on the pig's head and looked up at the 7 enemies with gloomy expressions. "Everyone, are you ready? Thank you for your kindness, Senior. How can we not come?" A cooking demon from Yingzhou said sinisterly, "Although we're being underestimated, I'm not so desperate that I'll give up on myself. Even if I have to use any despicable means, I'll try my best to let you taste the essence of my cooking." Good. Guashuk was relieved. "So, you're the first one? Shall we start?" The other 7 cooking demons looked at each other and nodded slowly. Since the opponent dared to fight 1 against 7, they wouldn't be so arrogant as to think that they could win just because they outnumbered them. The opponent was indeed unfathomable, but if they fought as a group, they might be able to win. The first one to be sent out was undoubtedly the strongest among them, but the other 6 weren't just there to make up the numbers. The cooking demon, who was the strongest and most confident, was the last one to be sent out. The rest of them would do whatever they could to exhaust his endurance. A war of attrition. 7 against 1. If they won, they might not be able to do anything, but if they lost, they would become a laughingstock. If things went wrong, their restaurants might be downgraded. What they wanted was absolute stability. Let me say this first. I'm an expert in stone cooking. Although the snow moon flour I prepared today has 10 dishes, There's no possibility of separating them. They'll only be served together. This is the so-called fixed meal. Head chef Gua, you don't have any objections, right? Standing in front of the counter was Chai Chuan Chuang, the veteran cooking demon of the famous stone restaurant Dayan. Set meal, I know. It's like the feeling of falling in love with a mouthful of beer and a mouthful of fried chicken. It's understandable. Guashuk laughed as he talked about old jokes that young people didn't know. He patted the pig's head next to him. But this old man is getting old, and his stamina is a little weak. Shameless. Everyone's expression became very complicated. Why was this old bastard talking nonsense with such a serious face? Compared to his prime, Guashuk's stamina was indeed weaker. However, the strength of a sublimator couldn't be compared with common sense. Moreover, even if Guashuk hadn't used any power other than that of a cooking demon, he could still walk in and out of paradise alone. Could he be a weakling? If he was a weakling, what about the others here? Cell-level noobs? Once he said that, the 7 cooking demons' expressions became unsightly. After pondering for a long time, Chai Chuan Chuang said, "Are you talking about rest time? We can discuss it, but it can't be too excessive." No, you misunderstood. Guashuk opened his mouth and laughed. He waved his hand. Rest time? There's no need. Please don't worry. After a short silence, Chai Chuan Chuang looked puzzled. What do you mean? Don't you think it's not good to bully young people too much? I'll take a step back. Guashuk smiled and patted the pig's head under his elbow. He said warmly, "What I mean is, no matter what you make, I can accept it and eat it. However, I'm old, and I don't want to waste my energy. So, I'll just cook this dish today." He spread out his hands and said with a calm face, "As long as one of you can eat this dish of mine, it'll be my loss." Bang! The sound of something breaking broke the silence. Under Chai Chuan Chuang's hand, a crack appeared on the chopping board. This middle-aged man, who had kept a calm face, widened his eyes. His eyes were bloodshot, and his expression was indescribably ferocious. He was furious. Not only him, but also the other 6 cooking demons behind him. At this moment, under such a disdainful and contemptuous condition, they fell into an unstoppable rage. If this wasn't a duel between cooking demons, even if Chai Chuan Chuang knew that there was a big gap between their strength, he would still raise his fist and punch this old smiling face. What do you think? The condition is fair, right? Guashuk still didn't think it was enough. He smiled proudly. I like a fair duel the most. Both sides have to stand on the same starting line. In this way, no matter how weak you are, as long as you eat this dish, you can win, right? What do you think? What do you think? Ha 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 ha. Don't joke around. Chai Chuan Chuang roared and slammed his hands on the table. I don't accept it. I will never accept such a humiliating condition. Guashuk, you bastard, how much are you going to humiliate us before you stop? Are you angry? Guashuk looked at him in shock, as if he couldn't understand. Is this considered humiliating? It's too strange. I'm just giving you a chance. Besides, do you have a choice not to accept it? He grinned, and his old face slowly twisted. He didn't hide the malice and ferocity in his heart anymore. Even if you want to bargain, you should at least have enough, right? I won't give you a little face and start a dye factory, okay? The old man was laughing. He pressed the pig heads of his subordinates and told them, Listen, I will do this, whether you accept it or not. If you can't stand such a humiliation, please turn around and leave. Even if you admit defeat by leaving, it's okay. That way you can flatter yourselves, right? It's not like I can't even defeat a 170-year-old old man in a group fight. I just can't stand being humiliated. Ha 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 ha. In the dead silence, only the old cooking demon's laughter could be heard. Everyone's faces turned darker and darker. That old man is too despicable. Huaisher murmured. Isn't this as cool as a battle between powerful warriors? Shinichi looked at him in surprise. The halberd film gives off the vibe of an old swordsman with his eyes covered. It's so cool no matter how I look at it. She still didn't understand what was going on. Chapter 667. It's a psychological attack. Huai Shi explained, once on the field, both sides should be equal. They should go all out and let the opponent lose without any regret. That guy looked down on the opponent by going 1 against 7 at the beginning, and now he proposed such humiliating conditions. In addition to saving energy to digest, more importantly, it's to stimulate the opponent's mentality. Oh, it's like scolding people when they're playing basketball on TV? Shinichi clapped his hands and suddenly realized, so despicable. Tricks are also a kind of trick, Shinichi. That old guy doesn't care about what others say. At his age, he's fought all kinds of bad battles and has a lot of experience. If he can break the opponent's mentality with just a few words, he doesn't mind spending a bit of saliva. If someone leaves the field in anger, he'll make a lot of money. Huai Shi didn't hide his voice when he spoke. With the hearing of an ascender, it was like a classmate talking behind his back during self-study. It was impossible not to hear. He did it on purpose. He wanted to make the old man feel uncomfortable. The stronger the opponent, the more skills he would have to show. No matter what, he had to see the depth of the opponent. The old man didn't seem to care at all. He glanced at Huai Shi and nodded approvingly. His expression was that of a child who could be taught. Even using such a despicable trick, it seems that Senior Guo doesn't have any confidence in his skills. Chai Chuanchuang, who finally calmed down, said coldly, "Unfortunately, I won't let you get what you want. Even if it's a losing battle, I'll do my best. But be careful, don't lose to a kid like me." After that, he closed his eyes and calmed down, quickly returning to a calm state. He waited for the match to begin. As usual, after a bunch of nonsense that no one listened to, the bronze bell finally rang. The moment the high-pitched sound burst out, Chai Chuanchuang's hands were like moving clouds and flowing water, making his dishes as if they were an art. The stone feast itself originated from the Zen sect's banquet. The most important thing was to be calm. As the head chef, he naturally couldn't fall behind in his meditation. Now, once Chai Chuanchuang entered the state, he automatically blocked all irrelevant things and began to make his own dishes with all his strength. As for Guo, he finally moved. He took out a shaver and started to shave the pig's head at a leisurely pace. Like a hairdresser, he carefully removed every inch of hair. The hot water beside him was already boiling. He casually pulled off the pig's ears and stuffed the pig's head into the boiling water to rinse it. Ignoring the boiling water that reached up to his elbows, he quickly picked it up and casually tossed the pig's head on the chopping board. Finally, he rolled up the other sleeve of his gray robe. Huai Shi could not help but frown. Not only him, the other cooking demons also felt that something was wrong. Makoto, who had been paying attention to Kamiki-san, immediately noticed the change in her expression. She asked curiously, "Is there anything strange? I really hope that you Ingzhou people don't usually eat in places like this, so you don't know. That's not how you handle a pig's head." Huai Shi voiced the biggest doubt in his heart. In fact, he did not have much experience, nor did he study the unorthodox meat processing of pig's head. However, he had helped Feng Shu before. Occasionally, Feng Shu would braise some for Huai Shi and his friends to eat with wine. Huai Shi had seen the specific process many times. It had to be taken apart, then the lymph nodes, the corners of the eyes and other inedible things had to be taken out. Then, they had to be braised or prepared separately. Even if it was roasting or other things, it still required other processes. Looking at the pig's head, it was probably still fresh. It had just been cut off from the neck. The breed was not special either. It was just an ordinary pig. Guo handled it so crudely that the blood could not be completely drained. It would only be disgusting to eat. Could it be that the old man intended to make it so disgusting that his opponents would vomit? That would be too ridiculous. Now, the 7 cooking demons were so angry that their eyes were burning red like zombies. Let alone a raw pig's head in front of them, even if Gwashuk himself was lying on the chopping board, they would rush up and eat it clean. What for? Then, he saw the old man casually lift the big pot full of boiling water on the stove and throw it aside. Then, he put the bamboo basket he had been carrying on the stove. Huaishur narrowed his eyes and looked carefully. That thing was indeed a bamboo basket. But in the basket made of countless thin strips, it was dark, making it impossible to see what was inside. Only a faintly disturbing aura spread out from it. This was definitely a relic from the border. But it definitely should not be used to roast on the fire. It was not even a kitchen utensil at all. As if it was used casually, he poured ladle after ladle of cold water into it. Miraculously, the water did not seep out. Instead, it churned in the darkness between the bamboo strips and was quickly dyed with a layer of grayish-black. What was inside that thing used to store? Huaishur felt his scalp tingling. It was as if he was facing a huge source of radiation from the abyss. He felt that radiation everywhere was spewing out from it. Even with the depth-balancing device in the arena, Huaishur's overly sensitive perception was still uneasy and trembling. This old bastard, was he roasting some nuclear bomb with fire? Then, he saw the old man, Gwashuk, grab the pig's head with one hand and throw it onto the grid on top of the bamboo basket. Finally, he covered it with the lid. Then, he began to watch with folded arms. Don't mention anything like scallions, star anise, or fennel. He didn't even put a grain of salt in it. Steamed pig's head with water? Was this some F***king variant of boiled cabbage? Huaishur didn't need to look in the mirror to know that his expression was ugly. What the hell was this old bastard doing? As if he sensed Huaishur's gaze, the old man turned his head with a faint smile and sighed as if he was chatting. Actually, using a cauldron would be better. Unfortunately, it's a barbarian country after all. A bronze cauldron is not easy to find. There is one in the museum, but Xiao Hu's daughter won't let me take it no matter what. He helplessly clapped his hands and smiled. I can only make do with the traditional method. Cauldron? Huaishur felt a chill at the back of his head. This old man was just steaming a pig's head. Why would he need such a big thing like a cauldron? Wait, the corner of his eyes twitched, and he began to wonder if there was something wrong with his brain circuit. It seems like you've guessed it? Miss Huaishur really knows a lot about Dongxia culture. It's rare. Gwashuk clapped his hands and smiled. The people of Yingzhou seem to care a lot about ancestry and lineage, right? This old man's background is also very extraordinary. How about it? Aren't you interested? Huaishur felt as if he was facing a great enemy when he was stared at by that pair of mocking and cold eyes. Even if he wasn't his enemy at the moment. However, the ferocious feeling from the abyss crossed the barrier of depth and fell on Huaishur along with the gaze. It repeatedly lingered in his ears and turned into a strange whisper. Do you want to hear it? Do you? Do you? I guess you must be. Involuntarily, and at the same time, from the heart. Huaishur nodded. Ha, I knew it. Gwashuk laughed proudly, but his expression was not serious at all. It was as if he didn't care at all. If you want to talk about it, the surname Guo was originally inherited from the Guo kingdom. If you trace it back further, it's the real emperor of Zhou, the Ji family. If the emperor of Mu didn't boast when he saw the queen mother of the West, this old man's lineage also has some divinity. In Huaishur's pocket, the fingers on the phone moved slightly. He only felt that the thread of inspiration in his mind was getting clearer and clearer. He was only one step away from the final answer. Ahaha, there's no need to investigate. This kind of ancestral glory has nothing to do with me, but there's nothing to hide. Gwashuk glanced at him mischievously and directly said the answer. Before the Guo kingdom moved away, It was highly valued by the Emperor of Zhou, who was a demigod at that time, and was given an important task. The position passed down was called Uncle Zone. Huai Shi's fingers that were tapping on the phone stiffened in place. It was as if a bolt of lightning had struck his brain, illuminating the darkness and pointing straight to the only answer. Uncle Zone. It could even be traced back to the official position of the ancient emperor of Eastern Xia, Zhuanxu. It was in charge of the etiquette of the state, and it also had the functions of the calendar, music, history, and so on. However, this was just a trivial matter. Among all its powers, the most important one was the sacrifice. For the gods and ghosts of heaven and earth, it offered sacrifices at the 4 times when it appeared. It was in charge of the etiquette of gods, ghosts, and earth to help the king build and protect the state. If it was more familiar to the modern people, it would be called Grand Preceptor. The so-called Uncle Zone was the ultimate priest who represented the emperor in offering sacrifices to the gods and ghosts of heaven and earth. In the chaotic era where gods and humans lived together, it was the highest divine position that mortals could reach. Huai Shi's fingers were twitching wildly. He finally understood how hard it was for Hu Pe to control himself not to crush the phone. He suddenly understood. No wonder he wanted to use a pig's head. No wonder he was so confident. Indeed, if that was the case, even if there were twice as many people, if they weren't strong enough to stand shoulder to shoulder with him, it wouldn't be enough at all. This wasn't cooking, it was clearly cooking the sacrifice, in offering sacrifices to the gods and ghosts. Don't be so shocked. Actually, it's not that scary. It's just an exaggeration. Guoshuk waved his hand nonchalantly. The inheritance has been passed down until now, and there are only some unorthodox, insignificant skills. Moreover, I'm not the successor. FNMDP. Huai Shi was expressionless and didn't respond at all. He sneered in his heart. Since the Duke of Zhou established the etiquette and cut off the inheritance of blood sacrifice, he replaced the etiquette of beasts with the etiquette of humans. From then on, all non-human ghosts and gods were abolished, and a new order was established. Eastern Xia bid farewell to the tragic and bloody blood sacrifice and turned to another path. As the miracle of the inheritor, Uncle Zong used the calendar to reset the movement of the stars and used etiquette to frame the order of all things. Even if he only passed down a little bit, it was enough for this old man to live like a fish in water in Eastern Xia's genealogy. Imperial prison? Or lesser prison? He couldn't be bothered to keep it a secret and directly asked. Chapter 668. Imperial prison? It's not that exaggerated. Besides, it's too tiring. I have to prepare 4 to 5 days in advance, bathe and fast. I'm old and can't take it. Guoshuk shrugged and knocked on the bamboo basket beside him. He smiled faintly and said, "Today, I'll wash my hands and make soup. I'll make a imperial prison for everyone." Huai Shi's expression became more and more numb. It was as if he was watching a cheater using an anti-aircraft gun to bully refugees who only had 2 AKs. "Old bastard, where's your face?" Not far away, a few culinary demons who were not familiar with Dongxia looked over. They had no idea what they were talking about. They were waiting for Huai Shi's further explanation. However, Huai Shi was not interested in being a commentator. He just rolled his eyes and said, "You guys can just treat this old man as a pretentious prick." Anyway, if he was not lying, the result of the competition was already clear. This was a sacrifice for the Shangshi feudal lord. That guy was really steaming a nuclear warhead. He closed his eyes and sighed silently. In the silence, only the old man with one hand holding the steamer was humming in a low voice. He shook his head and sang a tune that had fallen behind many years ago. Those songs that were no longer known by people. Suddenly, the crisp sound of the kitchen bell rang. 15 minutes and 8 seconds. Chai Chuanchuang finished cooking. "I'm done." In front of the kitchen table, The middle-aged culinary demon raised his head and announced solemnly, "It's only a short time. Don't be anxious. You can take your time." Guashuk comforted him. "There's no rush, I'm done." Chai Chuanchuang raised his voice and announced again. Guashuk was stunned for a moment. Then, he smiled and said, "It seems that you can't wait anymore? Very good, very good. I'm also very curious. What kind of dish can an opponent who goes all out and even surpasses his previous level produce? Can we start now?" He grinned and sat at the side of the table, full of expectation. "Huai Shi Ding Shi, Snow Moon Flower. Please enjoy." Chai Chuanchuang took off his headscarf and personally played the role of a waiter. He brought the appetizer to the table and presented a pair of white chopsticks at the same time. It was made of ivory. The ceramic bowl that held the appetizer looked ordinary and crude, but if one looked closely, they could feel the charming curve and the gorgeous color hidden under the plain gray. Underneath the dishes, there was a gorgeous dark gold color, giving off a heavy feeling of brilliance. Without a doubt, this was the work of a master. The side dishes on the plate were even more exquisite and frightening. The deep-fried jade was decorated with cherry blossoms and wrapped in fine fish roe. Together with the fresh fish paste, the aroma of fresh fish assailed their nostrils. That restrained and dignified luxurious aura spread out. It was just a side dish, but it was enough to make some of the poor audience breathless. Especially Maki. The mixed-race girl's saliva was about to drip down. If this was a cartoon, the eyes would have turned into dollar signs. Originally, Huai Shi should also be in the special attack range. But Fang Shu's food was too delicious, and he didn't like other dishes at all. He only felt that it was gaudy. "It's so exquisite that I can't bear to eat it." Guashuk picked up the chopsticks and sighed. "Compared to your teacher, your skills have improved. Mr. Chai Chuanchuang, the lintel of Dayan will be glorified by you." "Don't talk too much, please eat, sir," Chai Chuanchuang said proudly. "That's it?" Guashuk grabbed the chopsticks and looked down at the side dishes on the plate. He frowned. "Can't you be more nimble and bring it all up?" Chai Chuanchuang was expressionless. "Sir, this is dining etiquette. Even if you're arrogant, don't go too far. You're so stingy, outrageous." Guashuk shook his head, mocking and contemptuous. "It's because of such idiots that Zen can't be free." The old man picked up the luxurious fish cake with his ivory chopsticks, opened his mouth, and easily swallowed the exquisite appetizer. He could feel the fragrance spreading between his lips and teeth, like a rich and noble incense, leading him to the luxurious palace. But when the taste gradually disappeared between his lips and teeth, all the gorgeous and solemn illusions instantly collapsed and disappeared. The high-rise buildings turned into nothingness, and the noble and beautiful women fell into the yellow soil. Time made everything vanish into thin air. It only made people feel lost. Only the bell of the garden abode rang, describing the impermanence of the world, the confusion of the mortal world, and alerting people. The original meaning should be like this, right? Guashuk nodded with satisfaction. It's worthy of the stone cuisine from Zen. Like the white bone temple, it makes people realize that everything is empty and turn to seek liberation and enlightenment. It can be said to be ingenious. He picked up the chopsticks again and picked up the 8 inches that was presented. It was a cuisine composed of sashimi, white silk, sea urchin, tofu, and other exquisite side dishes. It was still so exquisite, so gorgeous, and surrounded by the aura of wealth. It was as if a beauty was sitting in his arms, caressing his cheeks, and moaning emotionally. "It's so good, so good." Guashuk chuckled as he swallowed with large mouthfuls, and he enjoyed the boundless riches, the boundless tenderness, and the boundless satisfaction and splendor he had hoped for. He just shook his head in pity. Unfortunately, the vision is too small. At that moment, Chai Chuanchuang frowned. Just as he was about to say something, the old man raised his eyes and ordered solemnly, "Continue." Let's see if your endless glory can satisfy this old man. Let's see if this old man can transcend from your work. Thousands of buildings, thousands of people, hundreds of millions of assets, beautiful wives, beautiful maids, and endless luxuries of the world appeared in front of his eyes, and then everything quickly faded away. Everything became emptiness, and everything withered like dust. In this continuous eating, everything flowed, but in the end, everything returned to nothingness. Even the arrogant and ferocious Gwashuk's expression gradually calmed down. He felt the calmness and zen from the heart, ushering in an epiphany and liberation. Immediately, a mocking smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. That's it? Chai Chuanchuang's expression froze. Even if he had expected it, he did not expect the scene in front of him. It was not that his work could not let him understand the emptiness and tranquility of Zen. It was that this old man had long abandoned such results like a pair of worn-out shoes. No, it was even far beyond his own attainments. This old bastard did not even put the Arhat's Buddhahood in his eyes. It was true, the evil was deep. If you ask me, this is too troublesome, isn't it? Gwashuk held the miscellaneous food in his hand, and tasted the glory flowing on the tip of his tongue. He asked in confusion, Isn't it very simple to be free? It's much easier than this gaudy set. Chai Chuanchuang was stunned, and his expression was stiff. He was about to refute this evil, but he saw the old man's smile gradually become more and more ferocious and violent. You want to understand the Dharma, but don't be confused by others. From inside to outside, eat whatever you see. Eat Buddha when you see Buddha, eat ancestors when you see ancestors, eat Arhat when you see Arhat, eat parents when you see parents, eat relatives when you see relatives. He raised the bowl and drank the soup of the miscellaneous food in one gulp. He crushed the lacquer bowl inlaid with gold with one hand and laughed strangely. Only then can you be free, not bound by things, and free. Do you understand, little brat? If you don't completely devour this obsession, the so-called detachment, the so-called enlightenment, will always be the moon in the mirror, the flowers in the water. The old man raised his chopsticks and ordered arrogantly, Now, bring all your little toys here at once, all of them. Chai Chuanchuang had forgotten what happened next. As if he had fallen into a daze, he numbly followed the old man's orders and presented all the dishes. In the end, he watched the old man swallow them all. He did not even burp. He smiled contemptuously. He did not even bother to say, "That's all." He just wiped his mouth casually, raised his head and asked, "Next, it's this old man's turn, right?" In the silence, Chai Chuanchuang felt fear from the bottom of his heart. It was difficult to understand, but he could not escape. With the last of his courage, he nodded. He sat in front of the cooking table. Even though he knew that he could not win, he still attacked the enemy again. Very good, I like people who keep pestering. An enemy who is not affected by fear has the value of going all out. Chai Chuanchuang, you are indeed a qualified cooking demon. You are qualified to enjoy this old man's junior prison. Gwashuk raised his hand, threw the steamer away, and placed the steamed pig head meat in front of Chai Chuanchuang. Please enjoy, Chai Chuanchuang. If you really have a plan, what was this? Chai Chuanchuang looked at the thing in front of him in shock. It was a pig head steamed with water. There was no salt, no pepper, and no seasoning. Except for the meat itself, there was no taste. There was even a faint smell of blood. Even so, Chai Chuanchuang still couldn't help but want to eat it. To be exact, he wanted to have it. He wanted to get it. He wanted to let this overly tempting meat fragrance fall into his stomach. An incredible thirst. His eyes were burning red. The emptiness that had been in meditation for decades disappeared without a trace. It seems that your skill is not very good. You broke the golden body just like that? Gwashuk chuckled strangely, but he did not urge him. He just stood aside and watched. He quietly watched the show that was about to happen. In the eyes of others, Chai Chuanchuang seemed to be possessed by a demon. He fell into a daze. His chopsticks were suspended in the air, and he was in a daze. Soon after, he let out a strange cry and jumped up from his chair. It was unbelievable. "It's biting me." Everyone was stunned and looked at him in confusion. Everyone saw it clearly. How could a half-steamed pig's head bite someone? But Chai Chuanchuang was not necessarily talking nonsense. He was just making people hallucinate. There were many ways to do that. After calming down, Chai Chuanchuang once again reached out his chopsticks to the food in front of him. He made up his mind. Even if the pig head opened its mouth to bite him this time, he would never let it go in this way. He fell into a daze again. Even if he was bitten by the illusory pig head, he did not let go or retreat. He was going to hold this overly glorious and tempting power in his hands. In the silence, there was a surprised cry. Chai Chuanchuang, who was in a daze, suddenly trembled. 3 of his fingers were missing. The pig head's closed mouth slightly arched, and one could vaguely see the extra fingers in its mouth. A chill suddenly came and engulfed everyone. The dish that was supposed to be eaten by people was eating people at this moment. Power can eat people. Isn't this normal? It's the privilege of a feudal lord. Guashuk smiled strangely and mockingly reminded him, "Be careful. If the dignified cooking demon is eaten by a pig, it would be too ugly, right?" Chai Chuanchuang could no longer hear him. He was climbing. Intoxicated by the fragrance that no one could resist, he was climbing toward the throne in the void. He finally saw the power to rule the world. Chapter 669. What hit him in the face was a terrifying cold wind that he had never experienced before. When Chai Chuanchuang came back to his senses, he was already standing at the top of the mountain. He looked up and could stare at the magnificent and heroic halo. It danced in the air like an aurora, occupying the sky and easily dyeing everything with its own color. He had never seen such a magnificent peak. Dangerous and noble, when it appeared in front of him, everything in the world ceased to exist because it was the hub of heaven and earth. It was so cold, but he could not feel fear, because there was an unexpected and terrifying flame burning in his chest, dispelling the cold that was not worth mentioning. It burned his eyes red and urged him to go forward. He was challenging the perilous peak where countless corpses had been buried. Even if there were constant screams, along with the thin bodies, falling from the sky and smashing into meat paste beside him. The splashing blood fell on his face, bringing with it a tempting sweet fragrance. Every time he climbed, there was a step of joy, just like everything he had experienced in the past. From the moment he was born, competition began in kindergarten. Students could only be enslaved. The class monitor had the right to eat first and could freely choose milk. But he still had to listen to the teacher and run for the teacher's orders. But the teacher had to listen to the headmaster, no matter how unreasonable the teaching requirements were, he had to meet them. When the headmaster met some students' parents, he had to put on a smiling face and try his best to please them. In front of the school board and investors, everyone's efforts became a set of numbers, written on the exaggerated smiling faces, and they were free to choose. The newcomer had to pour tea for the senior, and the senior had to greet the class monitor. The class monitor was nothing in front of the CEO, but the CEO also had to bow to the servant, to the higher class monitor. In the human world, there was a hierarchy. The invisible floors separated the height and shrouded everything in it. To please the master and become the chief senior brother, he could freely order other apprentices to deal with the chores for him. To get the skills and become a chef, he could get rid of the mischief at the bottom of the pyramid. When he looked up, he could see the general's cold face. To surpass his classmates, colleagues, and teachers. Step by step, he hung his name above the name of the great Een, but was this enough? Why did he stop? When he looked at the other mediocre colleagues around him, he was puzzled. Wasn't this just the beginning? He struggled to climb upwards, forgetting everything. Appraised as a 1-star culinary demon. Independent. After completing his apprenticeship, he would be able to earn a huge amount of money. But no matter how much money he had, it was meaningless. Once he obtained 2 stars, he would be able to control the Great One and become a general who kept his word. He would be able to walk under the spotlight and bask in the envious gazes of everyone. But it was still limited to the signboard of Da'in, buried by the glory of the previous generation. With a 3-star rating, the Chai Chuan clan would be able to form their own faction. They would be able to look down on others and laugh proudly at their peers. Then, it went up even further, until the courtiers bowed their heads and the physicians saluted. Even in front of the High Emperor, he could talk cheerfully and humorously. That's right, as long as I move forward, all of my opponents will crawl under my feet. Chai Chuanchuang strode toward the throne of the Devil Chef's Peak. Just a little bit more in front of the dining table. Chai Chuanchuang's arm was already exposed to the bone. Sweat constantly dripped from his forehead and face. He was drenched in sweat. He panted heavily. Between the bones of his fingers, a pair of trembling chopsticks was unable to cross the final line. He was only 1 step away from the end. Only 1 step left. What a pity it ends here. Guashuk looked down at his miserable opponent with pity. Above his head, the cold light sprinkled down, and a huge shadow spread out, covering that pale face. In that instant, under the peak, the terrifying snowstorm came to an abrupt end. Chai Chuanchuang finally saw, behind the thousands of neon lights in the sky, the sinister shadow and the pair of indifferent and mocking eyes. He looked down. He gazed at the struggling ant in his palm. Darkness enveloped everything in an instant. When the beautiful illusion dissipated, the flame of ambition in his heart had unknowingly dissipated, replaced by an empty space. He lowered his head and saw the gap in his chest, as well as the wriggling faces of the poisonous insects nibbling at his lungs. They were laughing maliciously at him. When he embraced power, it was also devouring him. At this moment, the magnificent peak finally revealed its malevolence. After the snow faded, only a wriggling scarlet was left. Countless broken limbs piled up in a complicated manner, and countless broken skulls were arranged in rows. Stinky blood flowed out from the gaps, crawling through the distorted faces and empty eyes. The tragic mountain formed by the piles of corpses reverberated with a terrifying, shrill laughter. Tentacles stretched out from it, pulling his broken arms and body inwards, shrinking little by little. Go away! Go away! Chai Chuanchuang screamed, roaring furiously as he struggled with all his might. He staggered backward, even though he had woken up from the illusion. He still couldn't get rid of the terrifying nightmare, nor could he escape from the empty gaze of the pig head in front of him. The cracked face was quickly twisting, but no blood could seep out. In the mournful wail, the last bit of his consciousness collapsed. He completely fainted. In the dead silence, only the faces of the other 6 demon chefs gradually darkened. Their expressions twitched, and their faces turned ashen. On the plate, the pig head was still intact. Not only did the aroma not disperse with the passing of the temperature, but it became more and more alluring under the offerings of the sacrificial victims. It was tempting the next victim to come on stage. However, no one took a step forward. No matter how patiently they waited, no one spoke. What's wrong? What's wrong, everyone? Guashuk sneered softly, looking at the complicated faces. You're retreating just like this? You're scared just like this? Is there only one person who failed? Someone couldn't hold back his anger and uneasiness, growling in a low voice. This kind of thing, can it really be considered a dish? Why not? The so-called pig is for people to eat, isn't it? It's just that the requirements for the customers are a little higher. Otherwise, why would it be called the junior prison? This is the privilege of the nobles. Guashuk grinned, revealing his jagged, sharp teeth, just like a monster showing off his weapon. He grinned hideously. You should be able to feel it, right? This is the weight of the country. No matter how greedy you are, after death you will turn into a vengeful spirit to plot against the country. You will feel satisfied in front of this junior prison. But if you don't have amazing courage, if you don't have the ambition and means of a ruler of a city or a country, you won't be able to enjoy such a privilege. If you don't have the courage, don't mention the position of the House of Representatives. If you don't have the virtue to match the position, there will be disaster. Incompetent people who only looked impressive, vile people who only knew how to seek personal gain, and idiots who did not know their own worth deserved to be devoured. No matter how pitiful and sad you are, you can only blame yourself. Come, let me see your structure, let me see where your courage lies. In the tyrannical laughter, Gwashuk slowly opened his arms. A huge shadow covered the entire arena, and countless teeth hidden in the darkness slowly revealed from the deepest part of the soul, dripping with sticky saliva, with indescribable malice and hunger. From the top, he looked down and asked mockingly, "Today, can you let me eat to my heart's content?" Huaishur lowered his eyes. "Let's go, Maki." Huaishur slowly got up and told her, "There's no need to watch anymore. That old ghost, from the beginning, was here to torture people. This kind of dish that was enough to eat ghosts and gods, when brought here, it was simply a cross-latitude attack. No matter how powerful Kung Fu was, it couldn't beat a foreign gun. No matter how many opponents there were, it was useless against a two-directional foil. If it wasn't for the royal family, who was connected to the country's destiny, who didn't have the blood of divinity, and who wasn't the kind of hero of 100 generations who could strive for the position of a duke from scratch, it was absolutely impossible to eat that thing. After thousands of years of inheritance, what the junior prison represented was this terrifying weight of the country. Not to mention what kind of things were hidden in the dish. From the beginning, it stood in an invincible position. But it also used all kinds of despicable means to mess with the opponent's mentality. It was like whipping the corpse after a massacre. He was excessively strong and despicable. There was no weakness that could be exploited. It was simply invulnerable. "Don't you want to try it, Miss Huaishur?" As if he could sense the figure leaving behind him, Gwashuk asked without looking back. "In my humble opinion, there are not many people here who can enjoy this junior prison except for you. If there's a chance." Huaishur responded expressionlessly. Young Master Ming could eat it, and so could the Prince of Paradise. Whether it was the identity of a disaster musician or the leader of a large group, he had enough status and capital to enjoy such treatment. But now was not the time. He didn't have the confidence to win. By the way, there's another good news to announce. Before leaving, he suddenly heard Gwashuk's raised voice. The old man looked back happily, grinned, and smiled at the audience outside the field. "Tomorrow, the challenge will continue. I will randomly choose half of the remaining culinary demons to be my opponents. This old man can't take turns to fight, so please be prepared. By the way, if Miss Huaishur wants to come, you're welcome at any time, anywhere is fine." The monster in the shadow chuckled strangely. "Putting aside other irrelevant things, I think you are the only opponent who can bring me a surprise. Please do your best when the time comes." Huaishur's footsteps paused for a moment, and he looked back. Looking at the pair of eyes full of darkness and hell, he told him, "I will." With Huaishur's departure, the competition continued. No, it should be said that the one-sided massacre had just begun. But in the audience outside the arena, there were culinary demons constantly getting up, turning around and leaving. They didn't look back, and their footsteps were hurried, as if they were fleeing. At this moment, more than half of the people who left had made up their minds to withdraw. Their minds had been completely defeated by such a tragic scene. In the dead silence, there was only hoarse laughter. The monster from Taichin Heavy Industry, with his own strength, had engraved a terrifying shadow in everyone's hearts, and used this unparalleled strength to destroy all confidence. Run away, children, run away quickly. Because your invincible enemy is here. Until they left the arena and returned to their residence, Huai-Shi didn't speak again. That's too much. Why did he target Miss Huai-Shi? The sullen Zhen, she complained. Isn't he the representative of cousin Hu Pe? Shouldn't we all be comrades? For that old thing, the word comrade is too cheap, and it has no meaning. Huai-Shi shook his head. As long as they are standing on the arena, they are all his enemies. Not recognizing anyone is the real essence of the battle between culinary demons. If a comrade blocks the way, then kill the comrade together and defeat him. For such a huge monster like him, did he really need such a thing as a comrade? Who knows, we might really have to fight in the end. Huai-Shi rubbed the space between her eyebrows. I have to start preparing too. Zhen, she looked up in surprise. But I don't want to be the patriarch. Huai-Shi was speechless. Wasn't it a little too early to start worrying about being the patriarch? Do you really think I'm going to win? Wasn't this confidence a little too much? Although I feel that the old man is very strong, I feel that Miss Huai-Shi isn't weak either. Zhen, she said seriously. If it were up to me, Miss Huai-Shi will definitely win in the end. In the silence, Huai-Shi laughed softly and rubbed her hair. Then, I'll take your blessings. After waving her hand and saying good night, Miss Huai-Shi went back to her room and closed the door. Then, she started to panic. After flipping through the cookbook for the whole night, she finally saw her future from between the lines. It's hopeless, just wait for death. Goodbye. There was no suspense in the outcome of the battle between culinary demons. 7 people lost miserably. Stone, ramen, sashimi, sushi, peony pot. All the dishes were eaten by Guashuk as if they were side dishes, but he still wasn't full. In the end, no one was able to successfully put Xiaolong on their plate. On the contrary, after the competition ended, Guashuk, who still felt that it wasn't enough, made himself a plate of dipping sauce, tore the pig's head meat with his hands, and ate it clean. In front of all his opponents, from his ears to his brain, there wasn't a single piece left. He chewed on the terrifying essence of the abyss wantonly. After that, he only burped. He carried his bamboo basket and casually turned around and left, as if he was an old man walking his bird. Only dead silence and tragic scene were left. As he was leaving the arena, Vladimir received a phone call. Okay, I'll be there right away. 10 minutes later, he saw his employer, who hadn't shown up since the beginning of the battle between the culinary demons. He looked like he was aging prematurely. There were spots of white on his beard and hair. A middle-aged man in a suit was sitting on the sofa, muttering to himself. It was his employer, Masahiro Rimi. More people called this man Sergei Salesh Satomi. Although he was the eldest son of the main family, among all the candidates for the head of the family, he had the weakest relationship with the family. Ever since he left home and went to the Russian Federation, he had no financial dealings with the family. Over the years, he had been traveling between the Russian Federation and Africa as a traveler and businessman on the surface. Not many people knew what kind of business he was doing behind the scenes. Many people knew that he was very rich, very powerful, and had many close friends in the upper echelons of the Russian Federation government. Other than that, everything else was hidden in the fog. Vladimir wasn't interested in this, nor was he in awe or anything. After walking in, he greeted him warmly. Oh, what have you been busy with these 2 days? Long time no see. She rummaged through his liquor cabinet and found a bottle of whiskey. Then, she began to pour it into his mouth. Walia, you'd better not speak Japanese. The name Dana-san doesn't sound right. Masahiro Rimi shook his head, sighed, and asked, Did you watch tonight's duel? Vladimir nodded. What do you think? Well, that old man is indeed a bit too strong. But boss, you don't have to worry, just leave it to me. No matter what kind of monster it is, I can fight it. Vladimir showed off his biceps. My tough steak is invincible. It's good to have confidence. Masahiro Rimi pondered for a moment and suddenly said, however, I will issue a challenge for you tomorrow. What about the opponent? Who is it? Kaori Kiriko. An unexpected name came out of Masahiro Rimi's mouth. In an instant, Vladimir came to a realization. In order to avoid being attacked by Gwashuk, he had chosen an opponent for himself in advance. Avoiding a strong opponent in the middle of the game and avoiding losses was a brilliant idea. Vladimir didn't mind. No matter how reckless he was as a warrior, he still knew tactic. Temporarily retreating was even more shameless, not to mention that he had long been interested in Miss Kaori Kiriko. Change of plan, do you understand what I mean, Walia? Masahiro Rimi suddenly said. The muscular cooking demon was stunned for a moment and nodded. Leave it to me, boss. I'm sorry for making such a request that's not in the contract. Masahiro Rimi thought for a moment and asked, I'll add extra money. It's still the Whale Protection Association, right? It's changed its name now. Vladimir corrected him. We've recently joined forces with the Indonesian Marine Environmental Protection Association and Northern Shipping to operate it. It's called the Pacific Rim Rare Marine Animal Protection Association. You can do whatever you want. I'll just give you all the remuneration in advance. Masahiro Rimi took out a checkbook and scribbled. He raised his head and asked, $100 million, is that enough? Vladimir nodded frantically. Masahiro Rimi thought for a moment and added another 30 million. Thank you, boss. Boss is so nice. The muscular cooking demon took the check with a smile and whistled. Then, he carefully put it into the innermost pocket of his toolbox. In this case, I have the funds for the next 2 years. Walia, you're not young anymore, right? Can't you take the money yourself? Masahiro Rimi shook his head. You're already in your 30s. It's time for you to settle down and find a wife to raise your children, right? It's still too early for me to educate my descendants. I can still fight for at least another 30 years. Children and whatnot, we'll talk about it in 30 years. Vladimir patted his chest and said seriously, the key is still to realize your dreams. Protect the blue sea and the earth. Isn't that good? Masahiro Rimi was speechless, so he got up and said goodbye. You're leaving just like that? Aren't you going to watch my competition? I'm sorry, I still have a meeting with the Ministry of Defense tomorrow morning. Although it's just a procedure, I still have to be there. Masahiro Rimi sighed regretfully and finally patted him on the shoulder. I'll leave the rest to you. How cold. I feel like I'm a mistress who's been abandoned. Vladimir laughed and drank all the whiskey in the bottle in one gulp. As his 5 fingers tightened, the glass bottle let out a sharp wail. It didn't fall apart. Instead, it shrank inch by inch. Finally, it turned into a pocket-sized toy in his closed palm. Leave it to me. He placed the small bottle on the table and turned around to leave. 10 minutes later, under the light pressure of the bottle, the entire table fell apart. That night, at 12:06 p.m., the battle suddenly broke out on the edge of the downtown area of Nara. It ended at 12:10 p.m. After paying a terrible price, the murderer Sasaki Kayomasa was arrested and brought to justice. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.